Picking roses in her yard turned into a nightmare, something she never imagined. The peaceful afternoon in Liberty Falls was interrupted by the sound of motorcycles, and Margot Harris soon found herself in the middle of the most feared gang in 3 counties. Her heart was racing as their captain prowled around her land. The Vultures Riders were not known for their kindness. However, these deadly guys were unaware that they were about to make the most significant error of their life, and no one in the community understood this. They believed they could intimidate Margot Harris, another retired teacher. They never thought they had chosen the wrong person. Some mistakes are only made once, and they had threatened the sister of a Delta Force commander. Tell us where you are watching from before we move on to the next part of the narrative. Please click the subscribe button if you enjoyed this story, as we have a special story for you tomorrow. Margot Harris's well-kept garden was filled with spring blossoms, and her beloved rose bushes were shaded by the afternoon sun. She moved with the controlled grace of someone who had commanded classroom attention for decades, even at the age of 67. Beside her on the wooden seat was a stack of essays from community college. Her love of teaching had not lessened with retirement, it had simply taken a different form. It was scarcely noticeable when the first distant rumble came. Mid-correction, Margot's red pen stopped and hovered over a student's well-written conclusion. Her skin pricked as the sound got closer and more purposeful, carrying a hint of threat. Her intuition for trouble had been sharpened by years of teaching, and there was something about those motors that suggested deliberate intimidation. With their chrome bikes shining in the Montana sun, the Vultures Riders loomed through the golden afternoon light like ominous ghosts. 5 riders drew up outside her white picket fence and rehearsed their formation, their leather cuts ornamented with territory patches and vultures' fists. Axel Thompson, their commander, cut his engine first. The roar was less menacing than the sudden silence. Margot put her papers down and got up carefully. She saw Axel dismount through her garden gate, his moves planned to demonstrate his might. As they got closer to her property, Lucas Shadow Shade, his second-in-command, walked alongside him. The rest of the bikers dispersed, obstructing the peaceful residential street in both directions. Axel's voice, boozing with fake civility, reverberated across her roses. The well-known Ms. Harris was the favorite instructor at Liberty Falls. Margot moved forward, putting herself between her house and the motorcycles. She had learned the virtue of calm authority from years of dealing with unruly students. "Gentlemen, may I be of assistance?" Axel's eyes did not meet his smile. "We're actually here to assist you. As you can see, Liberty Falls is evolving and becoming more hazardous every day. People need to be protected." As Shade circled back toward her side gate, Margot said calmly, "Our police department handles protection quite well." Axel gave a gruff laugh. "Anderson, Chief. It's hard for the old man to keep his coffee warm. We're providing something more, Ms. Harris. Trustworthy. Of course, for a fair price." Recalling Ethan's teachings on situational awareness, Margot looked at the locations of the other riders. Her fingers found her phone as her hand slipped into her gardening apron. "I have no interest in keeping you safe." "Uninterested?" Now Shade's voice was closer. "You don't comprehend, lady. This isn't an attempt to sell. This is an announcement for community service. People that don't value our services experience certain things." With his gloved hands resting on the white pickets, Axel walked over to her fence. "Gorgeous roses. If something happened to them or to that lovely community center you're so active with, feel embarrassed. I've heard that you are in charge of the preservation committee." While keeping eye contact with Axel, Margot's fingers located the precise emergency pattern Ethan had showed her and gently pressed it. "I have no say in the community center. The council of the town." Axel cut us off. "We're not speaking to the town council. We are conversing with you. $2,000 a month. Discount for education." His grin got bigger. "Friday is the due date for the first payment. The first of each month after that." The roses were disturbed by a cold breeze that permeated the tense air with their delightful aroma. Margot considered her pupils. Of the neighborhood she had worked in for 35 years. What if I say no? Shade stepped forward, lady, his shadow sweeping across her white blossoms, which she treasured. Examine your surroundings. Do you really believe you can say no? Channeling decades of classroom authority, Margot stood up straight. I need time to think about what you're offering. Until Friday. Axel took a step back and pointed to his guys. Avoid foolish actions such as conversing with Anderson. Police are called in. The cost increases. Way up. With a lack of practice, the bikers went back to their machines. Axel stopped and glanced over his shoulder. Don't forget, Ms. Harris. Friday. This visit was merely cordial. It won't be as nice the next time. Motors screamed into action. The noise reverberating from neighboring residences. Margot remained still and observed until the final bike vanished around the bend. Knowing that she had just started a chain of events that would permanently alter Liberty Falls, she finally let out the breath she had been holding. The unique vibration pattern of his encrypted phone reached Commander Ethan Harris at a clandestine military training center 300 miles distant. A signal that he had hoped would never come his way. God bless whoever had threatened his sister, she needed him. Despite her heart pounding, Margot Harris collected her documents in her garden with composure. She has taught young people about consequences and how to confront bullies for 35 years. It was time to impart a lesson that the Vultures Riders would never forget. At the military base, Commander Ethan Harris stood in front of a group of elite recruits, assessing their performance with a weathered face that showed nothing. He had learned the importance of remaining calm in any situation from his 15 years of Delta Force operations. His fingers twitched slightly in response to the unique vibration pattern from his secure phone, a signal he had devised just for Margot in the hopes that he would never notice. Martinez. With a voice full of authority that tolerates no resistance, he summoned his second-in-command. Take command. Emergency in the family. Ethan had access to secure databases inside the facility's command center that were unknown to the majority of citizens. Detailed intelligence files of the Vultures Riders MC came on his screen. As he read about their recent foray into Liberty Falls, his jaw tensed. Chief Anderson of the Liberty Falls Police Department called him. Chief, my sister Margot, and Ethan Harris. What's going on over there? Anderson's voice cracked over the line, Commander. We've been keeping an eye on the Vultures Riders' approach to the region. Although they have begun contacting nearby companies, this is the first time they have specifically targeted people. Describe their leadership for me. Axel Thompson was dishonorably discharged from the service. Lucas Ortiz, his second, goes as Shade. My criminal history is longer than my work history. They have roughly 30 active members and 15 more potential members. After processing this information, Ethan started making arrangements. Is there any local law enforcement action? We have insufficient funds and personnel. These people are cautious, but the county task team is constructing a case. There are individuals within the system. Ethan answered, not careful enough, with a quiet assurance in his voice that caused Anderson to hesitate. All they did was threaten my sister. Margot Harris was sitting at her kitchen table back in Liberty Falls, meticulously recording her experience with the Vultures Riders. She had taught for 35 years the value of meticulous documentation. Clara Stevens, the proprietor of the nearby hardware business, texted her when her phone buzzed. Margot, they arrived to the shop. Same requests, same threats. How will we proceed? Margot saw another motorcycle ride by her house through the window of her kitchen, moving more slowly than usual. The Vultures Riders are sending a message by demarcating their area. She called the phone of investigator Claire Anderson. Claire Anderson was standing at the Liberty Falls Police Department looking at her incident board's pictures of Vultures Riders members. We're putting together a case, Mrs. Harris, but it takes time. They're intelligent. They continue to commit grave crimes just outside of our purview. Detective, time is something we lack. They are attempting to compel support for a larger cause by focusing on local leaders. 2 more bikes rolled by outside the police station. They made it a point for their riders to record who came and went from the building. Claire was clearly frustrated as she stared through her window. They have a message to convey. No, said Margot. The pattern-spotting instinct of her teacher kicked in. They're showing their frailties. Every act of intimidation, every display of power. They are demonstrating their true selves to us. Ethan examined satellite images of Liberty Falls at his private console, noting known Vultures Rider positions. Responses from old teammates, those who owed him favors, and operators who saw that some threats needed to be addressed right away buzzed through his phone. A young intelligence officer came up, "Sir. The line is secure for Detective Anderson. At known Vultures Riders locations, there is movement. They're getting together." The phone was picked up by Ethan. He spoke in a calm tone. "Ethan Harris, detective. Discuss their patterns with me." "Commander, they're well organized. Too well organized to be a normal gang. They have a well-planned extension into Liberty Falls. They're getting ready for a certain event. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this narrative. Please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It is really important to us. Let's return to the narrative." Ethan observed the arrival of additional bikes at the Vultures Riders clubhouse through his tactical feeds. They marked themselves as targets, even if they believed they were building dominance. Once more, his phone buzzed. Other past operators have confirmed that they are available. They were mistaken for the hunters by the Vultures Riders. At the top of their food chain, safely. They would realize they were prey by tomorrow. Clara Stevens seen another Vultures Rider go around her store's parking lot. As she texted Margot, her hands trembled. They're keeping an eye on everything. Everyone is afraid. Margot answered right away. Their weapon is fear, but they have no idea what this place is like. They are unable to comprehend us. Ethan Harris's modified SUV crossed the state boundary near Liberty Falls in the encroaching dusk. His protected phone showed real-time intelligence, satellite photos, drone surveillance, and updates from his unofficial network. They believed they were creating a criminal empire, according to the Vultures Riders. Rather, they had set off a chain of events that would reveal their whole business. Axel Thompson planned his next growth phase while studying territory maps at the Vultures Riders clubhouse. His cell rang. One of his scouts sent him a message. "Harris is home. There's a change. She's not afraid." Axel snuffed out his cigarette, recalling the cool defiance of Margot Harris. "Everybody breaks. On Friday, we demonstrate to the entire community what occurs when you don't comply." Margot Harris graded papers at her kitchen table as dusk descended over Liberty Falls. Her serene exterior belies her steely resolve. She grinned a little when she saw another bike thunder by. They believed they were observing her. They were unaware that they were being observed. Ethan's voice reached her safe line. "I'm out for 4 hours. Continue recording everything. And you did well, Margot. It's my time now." The parts were moving. The Vultures Riders believed that Friday would be their forced demonstration. They were unaware that they had just begun the countdown to their own demise. Liberty Falls was shrouded in midnight darkness while 2 Vultures Riders hopefuls continued to watch Margot Harris's home. On his bike, the younger one, who was only 20, shifted uneasily. He had been staring at a deserted roadway for 3 hours. Just what Ethan Harris had anticipated. The approach was never heard by the first prospect. He was observing the dark house for a moment. The next he was unconscious, skillfully and silently lowered to the ground. When he heard a faint sound, his companion turned and reached for his phone. He discovered that he was looking into predatory eyes that were filled with icy calculation. Ethan whispered, "The woman you're observing is my sister. You need to deliver a message to Axel." His unconscious teammate was zip-tied behind Mike Collins' auto repair shop as the remaining prospects' motorcycle race approached the Vultures Riders clubhouse 10 minutes later. Knowing that panic would spread across the gang's ranks by daybreak, Ethan watched the messenger leave via his night vision optics. Axel Thompson looked at the property papers strewn all over his desk at the clubhouse. The plans for the community center held promise. It was in a historic structure in an excellent location, ideal for their growing business. The prospect's message buzzed through his phone. As Axel read it, his expression clouded. The prospect stood in front of Axel's desk and mumbled, "Sir. He just showed up like a ghost and told me to let you know that you have a day to leave Liberty Falls. And then he goes hunting." Shade struck the desk with his fist. "Just one man. Is he threatening us because of a teacher?" "He's her brother," Axel remarked softly as he retrieved data from his laptop. As he read, his face went a little pale. Combat records of Ethan Harris, Delta Force, primarily classified. What the heck? Their enforcer requested a tank. We have experience with military types. Turning the laptop, Axel displayed service images of a man with the kind of experience that would give seasoned crooks nightmares. Not in this manner. He's a ghost, this guy. When they want issues to go away, they send in this type. Margot Harris threw a strange party in her kitchen. Mike Collins washed grease off his grizzled hands while Clara Stevens sat next to retired Judge Harrison. Her living room was crowded with other entrepreneurs and civic figures who whispered to each other. With her hands trembling around her coffee cup, Clara remarked, "They threatened my daughter today. Children who don't look both ways when crossing streets are at risk for these accidents." The weight of Mike's Vietnam experience was evident in his voice. The town is evolving. People are afraid. Perhaps, though, he looked at Margot. Perhaps we should get over our fear. Detective Claire Anderson received an alert on her computer at the police station. The community center's property records revealed strange trends. "Chief," she called. "Take a look at this. Shell businesses that all point to offshore accounts. The Vultures Riders are not merely attempting to occupy the structure. They are a component of a larger whole." The Vultures Riders' newest recruit, Frank Scout Peterson, was riding his bike when Ethan Harris's SUV drove across the town boundary. This felt wrong in some way. Instead than intimidating instructors and scaring children, the gang was meant to be about brotherhood. Axel's commands buzzed through his burner phone. "Continue to monitor and report any odd activity." Mike Collins, the mechanic, was waiting with coffee and wisdom when Ethan pulled up behind his shop. Mike placed a chart across his hood and remarked, "Roads in and out. Here, and here are cameras. As I work, I've been observing them. Gangs have loose patterns." Ethan coordinated with his squad via their tactical communications system. A net gradually closed around their targets as former operatives took up positions near Liberty Falls. Margot's message chimed on his phone. "With new prospects, they are once again keeping an eye on the house." "Good," Ethan said. "Let them observe. When they threaten the wrong family, let them see what happens." Axel paced his office, each step displaying strain. There were more stories of people meeting in secret, shops closing early, people whispering to each other, and people pausing when his men passed. Fear was not the reason for the town's transformation. Another thing was forming. Scout reported via his burner phone, "Sir. Harris is not alone, my brother." 3 other military-type people were seen moving through the village as if they owned it. Standing before the preservation committee at the community center, Margot Harris's words carried the weight of decades spent in the classroom. "This structure is more than simply real estate, it is the center of our community and our history. There are some things worth battling for. Ethan watched drone footage of the Vultures Riders clubhouse as morning drew near. Their security habits revealed their vulnerabilities, including blind spots in their surveillance and predictable rotations. According to his squad, reinforcements from other chapters were called in, and more gang members were arriving. They believed that numbers would keep them safe. They were mistaken. A text message from an unidentified number appeared on Detective Anderson's phone. Vultures Riders were seen meeting with dressed individuals in fancy cars in surveillance footage. This surpasses a neighborhood gang. They're employed by someone, she informed Margot. Who is the question? As the Vultures Riders patrolled their region, attempting to project might, the rumbling of motorcycles filled the night air. However, a growing number of anxious reports about shadows moving in inappropriate places, malfunctioning cameras, and interrupted connections came via their radios. The hunters were turning into the prey. Ethan went over the final intelligence reports in his SUV. He gave his crew the command to begin the contingencies. Let them see us observing. Allow them to experience the sensation of being prey. Axel Thompson gazed at his desk's surveillance photos as dawn coated Liberty Falls in shades of gray. 3 of his prospects were discovered zip-tied behind various buildings after going missing during the night. They all sent the same message. There is not much time left. His men's increasingly frantic reports had continued to ping on his phone. They're everywhere, Tank said with his customary bluster. Every action is being watched by Harris's team. Some men are unable to sleep because they believe they are being pursued. Shade, his face contorted with anger, slammed through the office door. At Murphy's Gas, 3 more motorcycles were damaged. Nothing is visible on cameras. Man, they seem to be ghosts. Examining his area map, Axel noted the trends in the episodes. Their enforcers, money collectors, and surveillance squads were the targets of every attack. Methodical and competent. Reaching for his phone, he dialed a number he had hoped to never use. More guys are needed. Request assistance from all the chapters that are within riding distance. 2 Vultures Riders revved their engines outside Clara Stevens' hardware store in an attempt to scare off early morning customers. Their bikes halted and sputtered, and the noise abruptly stopped. In their coats, both M.N. discovered identical messages. They're watching you. Clara used her back office inside the store to meet with other entrepreneurs. She told Margot over the phone that they were afraid. The gang no longer has authority. They simply aren't aware of it yet. Mike Collins was working under a customer's vehicle. He set his radio to the frequency used by the gang. He had built specialized scanning equipment via years of mechanical experience. More anxiety and doubt were shown with each communication. He recognized Ethan's plan and grinned. Allow them to frighten themselves to ruin. Detective Claire Anderson assembled financial documents at the police station. Chief, she called. Take a look at these deposits. The Vultures Riders are transferring funds on behalf of a larger entity. Offshore transactions and corporate accounts. Margot Harris watched another member of the gang cruise by her living room window. They had become nearly desperate in their attempts at intimidation. A network of regular individuals turned into amazing watchers, as her phone rang with messages from former pupils, store employees reporting gang activity, office staff noticing odd gatherings, and more. Ethan coordinated with his squad in his SUV. According to a former SEAL, the north side is clear. The community center was the target of 2 potential monitoring setups. They are marked and guarded. Another operator confirmed that the east side was quiet. They have shut off their supply lines. Nowadays, nobody delivers to their businesses. Towns are turning against them. Sitting in his flat, Frank Scout Peterson gazed at his Vultures Riders cut. The fraternity he had joined was disintegrating. He saw 3 other gang members dash by through his window, their normal assurance giving way to anxious vigor. Axel's most recent orders were visible on his burner phone. Patrol twice, use force, and keep things under control. However, they lacked authority. They had never been. Shade paced Axel's office, his every step brimming with rage. We respond forcefully, convey a message, and perhaps begin with the teacher's priceless roses. Go on my sister's land. Their own radio buzzed with Ethan's voice. And you'll plead for jail time. Chaos broke out in the clubhouse. Security was broken and communications were compromised. Axel snatched up his phone and yelled commands to set up new procedures, switch frequencies, and search for bugs. But he had a strong feeling that it was pointless. Under the guise of auto repairs, veterans congregated at Mike's garage. Men who had fought in various conflicts came together to defend their village. Distributing burner phones, eyes everywhere, reporting everything, Mike remarked, like old times. New evidence pings Detective Anderson's PC. Photographs showed men in suits carrying briefcases as they entered the clubhouse at night. This goes higher than we anticipated, Margot reported. The Vultures Riders are employed by a person with significant business ties. Ethan now freely traversed the streets of Liberty Falls, his presence a conscious challenge. Gang members stayed out of his way, some chose to take alternative routes, while others pretended not to notice him. Fear was becoming a more powerful tool than violence. Axel got another report in the clubhouse. Due to family emergencies, 4 additional members had submitted their cuts. Others had failed to appear for planned patrols. The fraternity was breaking apart. Tank grumbled as he watched camera feeds that revealed nothing but deserted streets. They're inside our thoughts. This cannot be done by one man. Axel said, it's not one man, as comprehension finally set in. The entire fucking town. Ethan's message rang on Margot's phone. The first stage is finished. Their confidence was supplanted by fears. At sunset, stage 2 starts. Beyond the gang's location, Clara Stevens coordinated deliveries through back alleys, with businesses helping one another out. Economic pressure from the Vultures Riders had backfired, strengthening the community network. Ethan, crew took up their positions as night fell. Unaware that they were merely adding more targets to the death zone, the Vultures Riders had requested reinforcements. Numbers meant nothing to Delta Force operators. As more bikes arrived at the clubhouse, Scout saw from the window of his bedroom. However, these riders had a different appearance. They were apprehensive, unsure, and observing shadows. Liberty Falls had turned into a hunting area, and the predators had turned into prey. Axel read the most recent message on his phone while he stared at it. Midnight. This concludes. How did you make your decision? Real terror began to seep into his heart for the first time since he had taken control of the Vultures Riders. They had intimidated a teacher because they believed she was a vulnerable person. Rather, they would arouse something much more hazardous. A community's bravery, a warrior's talent, and a family's love. Vultures Riders ringed the community center, its antique brick walls looming dark against the dusk sky. Axel Thompson watched his guys guard the perimeter from the entrance. The town council meeting tonight would show its dominance by using intimidation to compel the sale of the land. 20 bikes, their chrome glittering in the streetlights, lined the street. Inside, Clara Stevens and Margot Harris sat placidly next to each other in the front row, both women exuding silent defiance. As bikers crowded the back rows, their vultures' fist patches and leather cuts intended to intimidate, other council members shuffled uneasily. Axel strode to the platform and declared, "Last chance, Ms. Harris. Tonight is the vote. Preservation fails. We assume responsibility. Everyone returns home content. Fight this?" "Well," he said, indicating his guys. "Mishaps occur." With decades of authority in her teacher's voice, Margot stood. "Mr. Thompson, you've threatened the wrong town. Examine your surroundings. Take a peek." Axel looked around the room, suddenly picking up on nuances that his haughtiness had overlooked. Mike Collins and a number other veterans stood close to the exits. Middle rows are occupied by former pupils, their features displaying resolve instead of fear. He saw shadows moving with military accuracy through windows. His cell rang. The security of the warehouse was compromised. There is no supply inventory. Then came another message. North checkpoint disabled for motorcycles. There are no suspects in sight. Ethan's team relocated outside without enough practice. While others arranged escape routes, 2 operators turned off security cameras. They formed a perimeter around their own and communicated with Mike's veterans via their tactical communications. Ethan's earpiece cracked open to hear Detective Anderson's voice. Verified by bank records. Midwest Development Corporation is the ancestor of all shell businesses. The group is employed by corporate investors. Axel's phone vibrated on his burner. Shade's voice was tense with fear. The clubhouse is dark, boss. There is no power. There was a communication block. Half of our people are unreachable. Sir, Scout said softly as she walked up to Axel. Harris's followers. They can be found anywhere. Members claim that this employment isn't worth it and are considering quitting. The council meeting was brought back into focus by Margot's words. 30 years of neighborhood history are embodied in one edifice. This is where my students learned. This is where their kids learn. Certain things are more important than money. Axel said, his voice tinged with desperation, this ain't about history. It's business. Huge company. You're clueless about what's actually. In fact, when Ethan stepped out of the shadows, his voice pierced the room. We are fully aware of what is taking place. The laundering of funds. The business relationships. Everything. As laser crosshairs flickered across leather slashes, Axel froze as he went for his jacket. At each exit, former operators appeared. Not raised, but weapons ready. Ethan heard confirmations from his crew over his earpiece. Every target has been marked. Every escape route is under control. Clara Stevens stood and spoke to the assembled entrepreneurs. We've had enough of intimidation. You do not own Liberty Falls. More bikes came up outside. Support from further chapters. They discovered that police cruisers had blocked the roadways. There are parked autos on the side streets. People from the neighborhood came out of stores and residences. Quietly observing. Recording all phone conversations. The hunters were now encircled. Ethan's communication broke with the crack of Mike Collins's voice. Teams of veterans are in place. Commander, it's like old times. Simply utter the word. There were so many texts on Axel's phone. Members quitting their jobs. No supplies were found. Safe houses have been breached. The meticulously crafted appearance of control came crashing down. Final opportunity. Ethan spoke to the assembled motorcyclists. Get out of Liberty Falls. Don't come back. May suffer repercussions that will make federal jail seem alluring. Axel observed the collapse of his empire through the windows of the community center. More motorcycles began to move. However, these noises signaled departure rather than fear. Riders who had anticipated easy prey were met with concerted opposition. Scout carefully placed his cut on a chair after removing it. Others came after them. The sound of Velcro tearing as patches were taken off filled the room. When there was genuine opposition, the Brotherhood broke up. It's not over, Axel said. But there was no conviction in his speech. You have no idea with whom you are actually at odds. No, Margot said, her soft voice piercing steel. You never knew who you were going up against. One building and one woman are not the focus of this. This has to do with community. Ethan's group used communications to report. Cars pulling into the clubhouse. Men in suits are hurrying to get rid of the evidence. Corporate puppet masters are severing their connections with their ineffective enforcers. The message from Detective Anderson was verified. Corporate automobiles were located. I'm going to intercept. A federal task team is on its way. Fear replaced arrogance as Axel turned to face his remaining men. They would have arrived in Liberty Falls with the intention of using intimidation to gain control. Rather, they had roused something much more potent. A community's collective resistance to corruption. Margot muttered, "Times change, Mr. Thompson. Are you intelligent enough to adapt to their changes?" Motorbike engines permeated the night air. But instead of marking advance this time, they recorded retreat. The Vultures Riders had failed in their bid to take over Liberty Falls. Broken by the unanticipated opposition of common people banding together. Through tactical optics, Ethan observed bikes vanishing into the night. He informed his crew that Phase 2 was finished. Continue to monitor. They will either make a total retreat or make a last-ditch effort. Margot Harris stood at the community center she had assisted in preserving in the encroaching silence. Surrounded by neighbors who had the guts to oppose. A teacher had been threatened by the Vultures Riders. Believing that education equated to weakness. They never realized that intimidation is not the source of true strength. But together. At the Vultures Riders clubhouse, Axel Thompson stood in his dimly lit office. He listened to Midwest Development's lawyer on his phone, his stiff posture expressing anger. There was a chilly finality in the corporate voice. You didn't succeed. Either tidy up and go away, or we'll take care of containment on our own. Shade stormed in the door. Face twisted in rage. 3 more chapters of retreating. Claiming that we are compromised and harmful. Harris's men attacked River's Edge and our supply storehouse. It's all gone. The clubhouse was fortified outside by the surviving members of the gang. Moving furniture into positions of defense. They moved with a spirit of desperation. The desperate acts of males who had lost control but were unable to acknowledge their loss. Detective Claire Anderson looked over security footage at the police station. Displaying men in suits taking documents out of companies with gang affiliations. Transfers were pinging her machine. Large sums are passing through shell corporations. She informed Chief Anderson that they were burning everything. Deleting links. Using his tactical tablet, Ethan viewed drone imagery of the clubhouse. Noting escape routes and defensive positions. Axel informed his crew that he had 2 options. Either flee or escalate. He doesn't like to run. Margot Harris's kitchen has turned into a makeshift headquarters. Clara Stevens laid out the real estate papers on the table. Mike Collins, meanwhile, annotated a municipal map with the locations of the veteran teams. Ethan established encrypted channels for community activists who had previously been students to coordinate. Take a look at this. Clara gestured at the ownership documents. The group put pressure on every property. They were all linked to subsidiary businesses. They're constructing something more substantial than a clubhouse. Margot's encrypted phone displayed Scout's message. Axel is going crazy. Direct action is being pushed by Shades. They are discussing setting an example. Ethan's voice came through their communications with a subtle authority. That's just what we desire. Men in despair make blunders. Backstreet gang activity has grown, according to Mike's veterans. Bicycles congregating at secondary sites. Distributing weapons. The Vultures Riders were getting ready to attack. They were being herded into positions that were ready, but they were unaware of it. An anonymous tip buzzed through Detective Anderson's phone. 3 months ago, Axel met with suited officials behind Murphy's Gas, as captured on security camera footage. Simple monitoring exposed the corporate scheme. They had no intention of allowing the gang to maintain power. She informed Margot. Vultures Riders served only as instruments to compel real estate transactions. The gang would have been abandoned after they got everything. Addressing the remaining members, Shade strolled the main area of the clubhouse. We struck them all simultaneously. The instructors and entrepreneurs. Anybody opposed us. Set everything on fire. Younger members, however, moved uncomfortably. Recalling Ethan's methodical demolition of their business. Watching from the corner, Scout used the phone Ethan had given her to film everything. The public face of the rebellion was Clara's hardware store. People from the community poured in with resources, knowledge, and support. Instead of isolating and intimidating the town, the Vultures Riders brought it together. A status report. Ethan made a tactical communications demand. His group reacted from several locations near Liberty Falls. Every escape route is covered. Every gang movement is monitored. Fighting insurgencies had taught them that the shape of the battlefield had to be controlled in order to win. Margot went over the evidence presented by Detective Anderson. Pattern recognition in her teacher's thinking. Their true objective was never the community center. She understood that access is key. Ancient tunnels and underground utilities. They have more ambitious plans. Axel's phone was always buzzing. Members leaving. Suppliers severing connections. Support from allied chapters is being withdrawn. When a more powerful force appeared, the brotherhood he had created out of fear fell apart. Bravery of the community. Scout reported via his burner phone, "Sir." He was careful to keep his cover. Weapons are being transported to Murphy's Gas. Preparing a significant event for tonight. Ethan's group switched places. Establishing channeling pathways and kill zones. They had expected this reaction. It was planned for. Would turn the desperation of the gang against them. Detective Anderson was pressured by superiors at the police station to abandon the corporate probe. Her captain told her to concentrate on the gang. Don't interfere with the money trail. The full photo, however, was on Margot's kitchen table. Records of properties. Corporate records. Surveillance images. The evidence grew. Demonstrating how businesses and criminals had banded together to earn Liberty Falls' affection. Ethan assured his assembled crew that they will hit tonight. Give them the impression that they are surprised. Give them the impression that they are strong. Next, demonstrate to them what true strength looks like. Axel was in front of his remaining soldiers. 40 men from different chapters, perhaps. We remind Liberty Falls tonight of the reasons why the Vultures Riders are feared. No pity. Not a witness. However, cameras were set up in residences and businesses throughout the area. Veterans were ready. And regular people were prepared. The Vultures Riders believed they were getting ready for a battle. Rather, a Delta Force operator who had never lost a combat he chose to engage was setting them up for failure. At her kitchen table, Margot Harris graded papers. Outside, in her garden, roses are in blossom. They were still beautiful. Not shielded by guns or barriers. But by the collective action of a community. And the steadfast dedication to justice of a brother. Like a closing fist, night descended upon Liberty Falls. While 40 Vultures Riders roared through deserted neighborhoods. The tranquility of the evening was broken by their chrome pipes. They moved in a formation they had practiced. Dividing into more manageable categories. Each aims for particular areas. Leading the primary force in the direction of Margot Harris's residence was Axel Thompson. Behind the visor of his helmet, his face contorted in terrible rage. The tone of Ethan's voice stayed steady throughout their tactical network. Every unit maintains its location. Allow them to give their attack their all attention. His operators remained in the dark. Observing as gang members set their shop around the town using night vision. In her living room, Margot sat. Seemingly vulnerable and alone. However, the veterans of Mike Collins had converted neighboring homes into observation stations. From their second-floor apartment, Clara Stevens' adolescent son operated a webcam, recording everything. Harris's house is approached by the first team. Communications received a report from a retired SEAL. Moving on to the hardware store is the second group. Third, separating in the direction of the community center and police station. Outside Margot's fence, Axel got off his horse. He had threatened white pickets a few days prior. "Light it up," he said. He reached into his saddlebag for the Molotov cocktail. However, his hand never made contact with the bottle. Shadows moved silently away from the darkness. In the rear of his soldiers appeared 3 operators. Both ends of the street were blocked by police cruisers. Ethan's voice pierced the darkness. Incoming federal agents. The final opportunity to give up. As Shade led his squad through the damaged door at the hardware store, Clara Stevens refused to back down. "You ought to have cooperated," he growled. He took the wire ties from his jacket. His victory lasted only a few seconds until the veterans of Mike Collins came out of the stockroom. Their orderly motions demonstrated their military training. Mike said, "Hands where we can see them." His commanding voice from the Vietnam era was unyielding. "The entire town is observing. They're recording everything." As security footage revealed corporate suits destroying documents at their offices, Detective Anderson collaborated with state police. Through their encrypted line, she informed Margot that it was too late. Copies of everything are here. Businesses are putting the gang under the bus, but they're also losing. Until the very last, Scout remained hidden amid the assailants. Then, when gang members targeted the community center, he assisted Ethan's team in disarming them. He had decided to support the town instead of the fraternity he had joined, which had changed into something unrecognizable. Ethan indicated via communications that there were several individuals in custody. Corporate offices are being targeted by a federal task team. The third phase is finished. From her porch, Margot observed Axel Thompson kneeling on her grass with his hands zip-tied behind him. His attempted display of force had turned into an exercise in futility. He spat, "You destroyed everything we built." "No," said Margot, "Mr. Thompson." There was a gentle authority in her teacher's voice. "You never constructed anything. All you did was destroy. It's us who construct." Scenes identical to these occurred around Liberty Falls. Members of the gang were encircled. A well-planned onslaught turned into a well-executed trap. As police went in with federal warrants, Ethan operators herded them into positions that were ready. As Shade and his men got into police vans, Clara Stevens watched from the doorway of her store. Her patrons gathered in silence, their phones documenting everything. Defiant witness replaced the dread that had engulfed the town. As the arrests proceeded, Scout went up to Ethan, "Sir. There is evidence of political bribery, corporate payoffs, concealed files at the clubhouse, and more. Connections, real estate documents, shell corporations, and offshore accounts abound on Detective Anderson's evidence board." Corporations had used the Vultures Riders as pawns to coerce land purchases through threats. Justice would now be served for both puppets and puppeteers. In order to secure scenes for the collection of evidence, Mike Collins worked with his seasoned teams. Liberty Falls had been turned from a victim to a victor thanks in part to their military background. He assured Ethan that the community was worth fighting for, just like in the past. The beauty of Margot's roses, which bloomed unharmed, is proof that preservation is preferable than destruction. For 35 years, she taught literature, demonstrating to her students how ordinary people may exhibit amazing bravery. Her village has now learned its lesson. Ethan's team submitted final numbers over their tactical network. Evidence was gathered, business offices were searched, and 38 gang members were taken into custody. The operation had concluded with the methodical disintegration of the activity rather than with a fierce confrontation. As police escorted Axel away, Margot remarked, "You never understood. Liberty Falls is more than simply streets and buildings, it's a community of people and something valuable to preserve. Ethan was standing in Margot's garden, watching federal officials process the final arrests, when dawn came around. The Vultures Riders believed they were predators, but they soon realized they were up against something much more powerful than force, the collective will of common people. Instead, Detective Anderson's final report would describe how corporate wrongdoing was revealed by a criminal gang's effort to take over a tiny town. The true tale was more straightforward, involving the bravery of a town, the skill of a brother, and the unchanging values of a teacher. With volunteers already fixing the shattered door, Clara Stevens reopened her hardware business. Never understanding that fear only works when people stand alone, the Vultures Riders had attempted to control by instilling dread. Liberty Falls has come to rely on one another. Scout knew he had made the correct decision as he watched his erstwhile brothers being carried away. The kinship he had been looking for was discovered in a community's collective resistance to intimidation, not in leather cuts and vultures' fists. A status update. Ethan made one last request. With the streets clean, culprits apprehended, and the community safe, his crew responded from several locations throughout the town. Everything had gone according to plan, complete victory, little bloodshed. With the early sun casting golden light on her roses, Margot Harris went back to marking papers in her garden. Because they believed that education equated to weakness, the Vultures Riders had threatened a teacher. They never realized that unity, not force, is the ultimate measure of strength. Detective Claire Anderson arranged evidence on conference room tables while the Liberty Falls Police Department windows let in morning sunlight. Reporters, federal agents, and company lawyers were calling all the time, requesting information. News vans clustered outside like vultures, their satellite dishes extending upward. Ethan watched as suited men hurried in and out of Midwest Development's offices on security cameras. He pointed out that they are burning everything, observing vehicles load documents for destruction, and attempting to cut off connections prior to the issuance of federal warrants. In stark contrast to the two federal officials taking her formal statement, Margot was sitting in her kitchen going over student papers. Messages from previous students, each contributing a piece to the bigger picture, buzzed incessantly on her phone. She placed papers on her table and said to Detective Anderson, "Look at these property records." Every property the gang targeted and every company they threatened had something to do with the same development project. Standing in the doorway of her hardware business, Clara Stevens guided volunteers who fixed damage caused by the unsuccessful attack that night. People from the community poured in, sharing information, offering assistance, and fortifying ties that the gang had attempted to sever. Scout, who was still dressed in street clothing instead of his discarded gang cut, approached Mrs. Stevens warily. "You ought to see something. Plans for the entire town and clubhouse records." Axel sat in quiet rage at the holding cells of the police station, while Shade paced like an animal in a cage. As more proof came in every hour, they watched through the bars as their empire fell apart. Former brothers betrayed one another in exchange for mercy and information. A federal agent, sir, came up to Ethan with an urgent intelligence display on his tablet. 3 states' corporate offices have just started emergency procedures. Their goal is to limit exposure. Mike Collins secured the buildings the group had utilized by coordinating with his seasoned network. He reported over tactical communications that he had located another cache. Hard drives, documents, and everything else they attempted to conceal were all photographed and catalogued. High-level communications pinging Detective Anderson's computer indicated pressure from above to restrict the scope of the probe. Her captain commanded her to concentrate on gang activity. "We don't have jurisdiction over corporate angles." However, Margot's kitchen table revealed something more. Evidence such as surveillance images, corporate paperwork, and property maps demonstrate how companies and criminals work together to gradually take over Liberty Falls. Ethan informed his squad that they were running in fear. Observing business leaders leave their workplaces. Gang was merely their strength. The true players are now in the open. Townspeople congregated at Clara's hardware store to exchange information, turning it into an unplanned community hub. Phones showed pictures, surveillance footage, and gang activity logs. A corrupt digital tapestry made public by regular people. Detective Anderson, chief, called while looking at surveillance tape. 3 months ago, gang leaders met with corporate executives. The same suits that have spent the entire morning deleting evidence. Scout gave a thorough account of how business concerns had influenced the gang's growth. Targeted properties, pressure spots, and territory decisions are all planned by men wearing pricey suits. While federal officials took pictures of gang graffiti on Margot's fence, the roses in her yard continued to bloom. Instead, their own misdeeds were documented by the unsuccessful intimidation attempt. Now, every threat turned into proof. Ethan requested a status update via tactical communications. His group reported from several locations throughout the city. Corporate escape routes are tracked, witnesses are safeguarded, and evidence is secured. From combating gang violence to exposing systemic corruption, the operation has changed course. Federal agents followed Mike Collins through the basement of the community center, demonstrating how old utility tunnels were photographed by gang members. He clarified that they had more in mind than merely building a clubhouse. This had to do with access to infrastructure. Community members were gathered by Clara Stevens to record witness accounts, take pictures of evidence, and document damage. The resistance of the town had changed from active investigation to defensive survival. Detective Anderson was informed by Margot that everything is connected. Patterns in seemingly random events are recognized by her teacher's thinking. The development plans, business purchases, and the gang's targets were all part of a larger scheme. Ethan viewed drone footage of business executives getting on private planes. He informed his colleagues that they believe that money can purchase escape. Show them the true meaning of justice. Scout brought clubhouse documents to Margot's garden gate. He clarified that the gang was only the start. They were getting ready for something more significant. Something that would permanently alter Liberty Falls. The evidence board for Detective Anderson expanded hourly. Images, records, and testimonies linking corporate boardrooms to street-level criminal activity. The inquiry had shown a plot involving the highest echelons of politics and industry, not just a gang's attempt to seize power. From his jail, Axel said, "You don't know what you've begun. Not everyone goes down without destroying everything." However, Liberty Falls was already a different place. Residents kept an eye on groups and the streets, recording any unusual activity. Ex-victims started working as investigators. The town had discovered how to reveal wrongdoing at its root in addition to fending off threats. The next stage. Federal agents arrived with corporate warrants, and Ethan gave his crew instructions. The first was the gang. "We locate the head now." Margot Harris's garden continues to stand as a testament to perseverance. Despite coercion and threats, her roses are flowering. After trying to govern via terror, the Vultures Riders learned that once courage is roused, it spreads throughout a community like wildfire. Executives hurried to flee as private helicopters landed on Midwest Development's offices. Hours of document shredding had caused their pricey clothes to wrinkle. IT personnel erased servers while shredders inside ran non-stop. Unaware that a tiny town's opposition would reveal their entire operation, the corporate behemoth had spent months deploying the Vultures Riders as their muscle. Copies of all the incriminating documents were produced by Detective Claire Anderson's office printer, which buzzed incessantly. While watching security footage of corporate cleanup staff, she informed Ethan that they were attempting to bury everything. However, they are unaware that we already have their internal correspondence. Surrounded by old records, Margot Harris sat in the archives department of the municipal library. Something unsettling had been discovered by her teacher's meticulous investigation. She gave Clara Stevens an explanation of the development plans. They correspond to maps made by surveyors 50 years ago. They're not merely purchasing real estate. They are reproducing a particular pattern. As corporate security teams poured into Liberty Falls, Ethan communicated with his squad. Through tactical communications, he cautioned that they were there to clear up evidence. Keep all witnesses safe and all documents safe. Mike Collins guided his veterans into the community center's ancient maintenance tunnels. Beside survey markings, they could see new gang graffiti with their spotlights. He reported that they were mapping something. The suits were so desperate for anything that they hired crooks. Shade paced his cell at the police station, his normal aggression giving way to dread. He said to Detective Anderson, "You don't understand. The gang was only the first stage. This entire community will be destroyed by what they're actually planning." Clara Stevens converted the rear office of her hardware store into a command center, working with locals to record business operations. Photographs, phone recordings, and security cameras. Investigative journalists were created from regular people. Scout brought Margot a stack of documents from the gang's clubhouse and said they had found another one. Payoffs from corporations to local leaders that date back 3 years. Even before the gang showed in, they started purchasing influence. Through surveillance, Ethan observed as suits gathered in parking lots, briefcases were exchanged, and hasty phone calls were placed. His team documented every exchange and took pictures of every encounter, creating a network of proof that extended well beyond Liberty Falls. Margot laid old papers across her kitchen table and told Detective Anderson about the town council records. Each and every variance approval and zoning modification. Long before the Vultures Riders showed up, they began creating Liberty Falls. There is more corporate security in the area, according to Mike's veterans. Men wearing military haircuts and carrying concealed weapons are keeping an eye on strategic spots, pursuing possible witnesses, and trying to intimidate people by being there rather than using force. Another corporate flight landed at the adjacent airport, bringing in cleaners in an attempt to minimize the damage before federal inspectors arrived, Ethan said, adding that they're becoming frantic. After hours, Clara arranged community gatherings in the hardware store to hear testimonials from entrepreneurs who had been subjected to gang pressure. Every case revealed a deliberate campaign of coordinated intimidation and was linked to business development ambitions. Look at this, Detective Anderson identified political donations, offshore accounts, shell corporations, and financial records that all connected to Midwest Development's parent company. Scout brought his old gang burner phone and went up to Ethan in private. Axel clarified that he recorded every encounter with the suits, every directive they issued, and everything else. Margot discovered a decades-long trend while researching the local archives. Restricted zones, infrastructure developments, and real estate acquisitions all contributed to a design that only became apparent when considered historically. According to Mike's tactical communications, they're burning everything while corporate personnel vacate offices. However, they are unaware of the backup documents we discovered in the tunnels. As the evidence grew, Ethan cooperated with government contacts. Political bribery, organized crime, and corporate corruption. A straightforward gang takeover attempt was only one aspect of the investigation. Axel said from his cell, "You've started something you can't stop. The company does not suffer a loss. This village will be buried before the truth is out." Clara's security cameras recorded suited guys taking pictures of witness residences and documenting the daily activities of local authorities. Unaware that they were up against individuals who had already conquered their fear, the company had moved from denial to intimidation. Margot told Detective Anderson it was never about the community center. They required particular entry points and features. There was a purposeful pattern to the gang's pressure campaign. Ethan observed corporate security personnel setting up watch posts throughout the city. Their strategic maneuvers demonstrated both desperation and expert expertise. The company was accustomed to utilizing force or purchasing influence. They had no idea how to deal with organized community opposition. Scout reported from his monitoring position that more servers had been deleted, although they were unaware of the backups. "We've already replicated everything they're attempting to conceal." Mike Collins distributed new security duties while gathering his veterans in the garage. Even while the corporate teams received training, his men possessed something more powerful, a deep understanding of their town and a commitment to their neighborhood. As Margot compared old records with present development plans, Detective Anderson's printer produced yet another stack of evidence. The company's actual goals, a multi-generational pattern of acquisition and control, started to show. Ethan informed his crew, they believe that money and muscle solve everything. Teach them the results of a united community. Liberty Falls was now at the forefront of a fight against corporate corruption, having once been a town that resisted gang intimidation. However, these adversaries would not be vanquished by force, in contrast to the Vultures Riders. Different weapons, truth, solidarity, and the guts to oppose systematic corruption were all necessary in this battle. Richard Maxwell, the CEO of Midwest Development Corporation, was in a black limousine with tinted windows as it rolled into Liberty Falls. A profound change occurred with his arrival. Send the man who signed the checks when the hired muscle failed. He was escorted by corporate security forces, whose motions demonstrated professional training and mounting urgency, to the quickly set up command center in their local office. Ethan kept an eye on surveillance footage, identifying escape routes and security locations. Maxwell informed his team that he doesn't leave his office for minor issues. We're closer to the truth than they can afford because of his presence. The yellowed edges of the old maps that Margot Harris laid out on the conference table in the community center told a tale that had been brewing for decades. She told Detective Anderson that water table surveys from 1962 match every property the group sought. They are purchasing water rights in addition to land. Clara Stevens faced Maxwell's personal lawyer as she stood in the office of her hardware store. Her property was worth millions more than the corporate purchase offer. She gave the paperwork back and signed, saying, "Some things aren't for sale. It's not only real estate in this town." As federal officials followed Mike Collins through subterranean maintenance tunnels, their flashlights revealed more than just outdated utilities. He reported military-grade weapons cache over tactical communications, which had been staged months before the group showed up. They were bracing for fierce opposition. Axel Thompson had to make a choice in the interview room at the police station. In return for his corporate manager's testimony, federal authorities provided witness protection. "Do you want the truth?" Detective Anderson was asked. "Maxwell is here to bury a mess, not to clean it up." Corporate teams were setting up surveillance equipment near town water access points, according to Scout's morning reconnaissance. He informed Ethan that they were no longer only observing people. They are mapping the infrastructure. Margot's research linked infrastructure developments, zoning revisions, property transactions, and seemingly unconnected occurrences. She assured Clara that the gang violence was all a front. While they positioned everything, they needed us to be alarmed and preoccupied. While Ethan's squad held their positions throughout the town, Maxwell remained in his makeshift office and watched security feeds. Harris told his security chief that he was not merely a local hero. "He is Delta Force. He's 3 steps ahead of us in whatever we try." Encrypted information and corporate communications that were inadvertently moved to gang servers were discovered on Detective Anderson's computer. Deeper levels of conspiracy, plans inside plans, and a methodical effort to take over more than just land were exposed in every document. Margot pointed to survey markers and described the water table maps to Ethan. One of the state's biggest undeveloped aquifers is where Liberty Falls is located. In the event of a drought, pure, deep water would be worth billions of dollars. When similar proposals came from corporate representatives, Clara connected with other business owners. Large buyouts involving non-disclosure clauses. Not a single owner agreed. The power of unity over greed was demonstrated. Scout gingerly went up to Ethan, "Sir. I discovered something much larger than a clubhouse in Axel's files, construction plans. They intend to dam the watershed as a whole. Mike's veterans reported that professional teams were setting up control points over critical resources, and that corporate security had increased around essential infrastructure, water treatment plants, reservoir access, and utility junctions. Maxwell's phone was always buzzing. Lawyers cautioning, political friends pulling out, and board members demanding action. When a small town's opposition revealed decades of corporate corruption, his meticulously planned strategy fell apart. Examining the facts, Detective Anderson informed Margot that the gang was cheap muscle. However, this concerns future supply, aquifer access, water rights, and resource control. As the evidence grew, Ethan worked with federal ENV Vultures mental protection personnel. Plans for corporate development exposed chronic violations of ENV Vultures mental standards, indigenous land rights, and water protection legislation. "Do you believe you have won?" Maxwell contested via the message from his lawyer. "Businesses never lose. We simply switch tactics." However, Liberty Falls had also transformed. As citizens recorded business operations, Clara's hardware store turned into a repository for evidence. Important infrastructure was secured by Mike's veterans. Margot's investigation revealed past trends in resource exploitation. As she shared Axel's secret files, Scout clarified that the development endeavor was never about property. Controlling, selling, and turning Liberty Falls into a corporate water source for their highest bidders are all related to water. Through surveillance, Ethan saw Maxwell and saw the CEO's increasing desperation. He informed his team that he was not here to bargain. "He's coming to get rid of witnesses and other evidence." The evidence board for Detective Anderson expanded hourly. Testimonies, records, and maps all point to a multi-generational conspiracy. Corporate avarice is endangering a town's independence as well as its basic survival. Margot addressed the assembled community leaders. "They wanted us scared. People who are afraid tend not to pay careful attention, ask questions, or make connections. However, we are no longer afraid." Through the window of his office, Maxwell gazed over Liberty Falls, a tiny community that had somehow defied decades of business strategy. There was another board message buzzing on his phone. "Do whatever it takes to fix this." Corporate security officers saw the neighborhood patrols that Clara Stevens arranged. With every contact that was recorded, the observer's authority shifted to that of the observed. As they looked over surveillance tape, Ethan told Margot that they believed that money and strength could buy everything. They never realized that truth, communal justice, and certain other things aren't for sale. Liberty Falls was put to the ultimate test. Although corporate power possessed various weapons, money, influence, and institutional control, the Vultures Riders had threatened to use violence. The community had become adept at fending off gang intimidation. They would now have to learn how to combat an adversary that conducted business in boardrooms rather than bars. As Maxwell's security troops positioned themselves around vital infrastructure, darkness descended on Liberty Falls. Their goal had nothing to do with protection, but their movement implied military training. Ethan observed corporate operators using night vision optics to place potentially more deadly devices, rather than explosives, near water mains. He stated via tactical communications that they are tagging entry points in order to get control of the water supply. Traditional method of manipulating resources. With old water rights documents all around her, Margot Harris sat in her kitchen. An unsettling truth had come to light as a result of her research. She told Detective Anderson that the aquifer data demonstrates that they have been preparing for this for 30 years, purchasing land one piece at a time and setting up for complete water control. Away from corporate oversight, Clara Stevens convened business owners in the basement of her hardware store. She informed the gathered audience that although the contracts entail transfers of water rights, they are now offering quadruple market value. "Our buildings are not what they want. What's beneath them is what they desire." Mike Collins established defensive precautions around water treatment facilities after consulting with his veterans. He said that he had corporate staff at every entry point. They no longer merely observe. They're getting ready to seize power. Across her desk, Detective Anderson stared Maxwell, whose pricey suit stood out against the shabby furnishings of the station. "It's amazing how fast a gang investigation uncovers corporate conspiracy," she said, passing out evidence folders. "There is a cost to everything." With a smooth response, Maxwell pushed a folder toward her: professional growth, family stability, secure retirement, and a tiny payment for turning a blind eye. However, Liberty Falls had transcended threats and pricing. Ethan's group noted a rise in business activity near the reservoir. Teams of guys in suits noting sites, collecting samples, and performing surveys. Ethan was given background information from Axel's files regarding Maxwell's personal history by the scouts. He has previously done this. Purchased the property, managed the water, evict the inhabitants, and acquire 3 more towns and aquifers. Margot's investigation uncovered other connections: building plans followed water table maps, and property acquisitions matched geological surveys. Every aspect of business strategy was designed to manage the aquifer. "They don't just want to make money," she told Clara. "Oil is losing value in favor of water. Everything is under the control of whoever holds it." Ethan observed through surveillance as Maxwell offered bribes in the pretext of investments during private meetings with local leaders. However, Liberty Falls has come to understand the real cost of corruption. Mike revealed that his veterans had found business paperwork in former gang locations and had discovered their processing plans. They intend to extract water on an industrial scale and build a private bottling business. Corporate board communications, requests for an immediate resolution, threats of replacement, and pressure to use all available methods to terminate the crisis were all buzzing through Maxwell's phone. In order to coordinate with nearby towns dealing with comparable corporate pressure, Clara set up community response teams. Beyond Liberty Falls, the opposition to resource theft became a regional movement. The violence committed by the group was planned. Her task force was informed by Detective Anderson. "While they were lawfully stealing our future, keep us focused on street criminality." Traditional deception. The latter stage, which involved systematic pressure on important property owners that escalated from offers to threats and targeted families and livelihoods, was made clear by Ethan's team's interception of business communications. Maxwell informed the council meeting that your town was dying anyhow. "We are providing future growth, job creation, and financial rescue." However, Margot's historical investigation revealed a different picture. Aquifers are depleted, communities are ruined by corporate water extraction, and residents are compelled to relocate when wells run dry. Timeline is being advanced. Scout stated that she was keeping an eye on company correspondence. Final water control preparation was ordered by Maxwell's. The negotiations are over. Mike's veterans documented infrastructure takeover positioning, corporate security, and the replacement of local utility personnel. Maxwell's actual approach became more apparent with each move. And the Vultures Riders were only the start. From his cell, Axel informed Detective Anderson. "Real experts, private military contractors, are prepared by Maxwell. They eradicate, not merely threaten." Clara's security cameras caught business teams documenting family routines, taking pictures of kids heading to school, and using surveillance to increase pressure. However, Liberty Falls had previously experienced intimidation. Margot told the assembled community leaders that water is more than simply a resource. It's life. If you manage that, you manage everything. That's their main objective. As the evidence grew, Ethan cooperated with federal Vultures mental protection officials. Public resource statutes, Vultures mental protection rules, and water safety requirements were all broken by corporate plans. The town council was told by Maxwell's attorney that they were battling an unavoidable fate. The future lies in water. It so happens that Liberty Falls is perched on our future. However, the community had learned to support one another. Infrastructure was safeguarded by Mike's veterans. Sales were rejected by Clara's business community. Margot's investigation revealed corruption. Her case was constructed by Detective Anderson. As his crew watched corporate security set up control points, Ethan said, "They believe that water is power. Show them that community is the source of true power." The fundamental right to manage its own resources was Liberty Falls' biggest threat, not corporate wealth or gang violence. Their streets had been targeted by the Vultures Riders. Maxwell now desired their future. Knowing that some things, like the ability to shape their own fate, were more valuable than money, the town readied itself for its last stand. Maxwell's private security personnel positioned themselves around the water treatment plant as dawn broke above Liberty Falls. While corporate lawyers gave emergency inspection orders, black-clad individuals with military-grade equipment set up control posts. Documents stating public safety concerns that were signed by purchased state officials. Ethan saw the corporate team's deployment through tactical feeds. As they take over the water supply, he informed his assembled operatives, "They're using official channels now, making it look legal." Margot's teacher's voice carried decades of authority when she stood in front of the emergency town council meeting. She scattered evidence on the podium and declared, "These aren't just corporate documents. They serve as evidence of institutionalized corruption." Maxwell's water extraction activities devastated 3 more communities. Hourly arrivals of business owners from other areas had turned Clara Stevens' hardware store into the resistance headquarters. According to a visiting store owner, Maxwell tried this in River's Edge last year. "Neither of us stood together. Our wells are now dry." As corporate teams drew closer to the reservoir, Mike Collins synchronized with his veterans. He reported via tactical communications that he had movement at every access point. They are installing control equipment in addition to inspecting. In her office, Detective Anderson confronted state officials, whose pricey outfits matched their pricey threats. "Amazing timing," she said. "How corporate takeover offers are turned down, and water safety suddenly becomes a top priority." As his teams took their positions, Maxwell watched security feeds from his command center. He gave the order to start the shutdown operations. "Let's demonstrate to Liberty Falls what occurs when sentiment impedes development." However, Ethan had foreseen this action. His team's interception of business communications exposed their real objectives, which were infrastructure confiscation under the pretense of public safety rather than examination. Scout noted that Maxwell's trend of exchanging intelligence from other impacted localities is constant. Create a crisis, provide a solution, and use resource control to compel compliance. Traditional corporate colonization. More victims were linked thanks to Margot's study. Similar methods were used by towns in 3 states where Maxwell's business had taken over water rights. Every community encountered the same trend. Corporate pressure, resource theft under the pretense of development, and gang intimidation. The shutdown procedure is about to begin. As corporate teams gained access to control systems, Mike's veterans reported. However, Liberty Falls was ready for this. In order to create an unanticipated alternative to corporate power, Clara cooperated with area business leaders and pooled their collective resources. She informed the assembled allies that they believe money only moves in one direction. Show them the power of the community. Maxwell's response when his men reported unexpected opposition was captured by Ethan's surveillance. There was no response from emergency systems. The control points were still locked. Access to the infrastructure is restricted by community-installed security layers. As federal officers entered his command center, Detective Anderson informed Maxwell that it was quite the operation, utilizing gang violence as a diversion from corporate water theft. With one exception, it nearly worked. Margot watched corporate security forces encounter unanticipated resistance from the window of her classroom. Community residents, business owners, educators, employees, and families came together at each entry point to protest resource theft. Mike said over the water treatment plant's communication system, "Your access codes are invalid." It's funny that when infrastructure is properly registered, community consent is required. Panicked messages from corporate board members buzzed through Maxwell's phone. When federal Vultures mental protection authorities showed up with warrants, his meticulous strategy fell apart. Community legal teams presented injunctions, and state police relocated to secure facilities. Scout claimed to have located their equipment cache, which led federal officials to secret company storage. Everything required for private water extraction, not simply control systems. The aquifer was ready to be stripped. Security footage from Clara's cameras showed corporate teams pulling out of their places. The community's organized response prevented their attempted takeover. Where individual resistance would have failed, the economic alliance had succeeded. Through his lawyers, Maxwell cautioned that this is not over. Businesses don't lose, we simply adjust our tactics. However, the truth had already been revealed by Margot's proof. Decades-long criminal plot, Vultures mental infractions, and systemic corruption. The corporate behemoth had at last encountered a rival it could neither scare nor purchase. Resistance from the united community. They were never able to comprehend. As corporate security teams were escorted away by federal officials, Ethan informed his crew. Real power comes from people banding together, not from money or force. Detective Anderson's evidence board provided the whole tale, linking Maxwell's water theft scheme to everything from corporate corruption to gang violence. Justice would be served for both boardroom conspirators and low-level crooks. As Maxwell confronted federal investigators, Margot admonished him, "You made a mistake by assuming that education equated to weakness. We learn from this town's history, not merely from it." Liberty Falls overcame corporate power and gang intimidation by banding together. Their streets had been in danger from the Vultures Riders. Despite Maxwell's attempt to pilfer their assets, neither force recognized the actual power of community opposition. Ethan observed government teams securing corporate sites as dusk drew near. Updates from other towns dealing with comparable struggles rushed across his phone. More than just a triumph, Liberty Falls was now serving as a model for opposition to corporate resource plunder. Clara informed the assembled press that some items were not for sale. Not our community spirit, not our future, nor our water. The most significant lesson had been learned by the town. The strongest weapon against systemic corruption was not money or violence, but rather the solidarity of common people fighting for justice. As Maxwell's private military contractors stepped out of disguised vehicles into the darkness that fell on Liberty Falls, their moves demonstrated professional training that went much beyond that of regular security personnel. These were mercenaries, not corporate guards, recruited for a last-ditch effort to take over the town's water system. As armed men took up positions, Ethan saw through night vision and reported via tactical communications that several squads were approaching water treatment facilities. This is a tactical takeover, they are no longer posing as inspectors. Standing in the emergency command center of the police station, Margot Harris laid out the last pieces of evidence on the conference table. She spoke to Detective Anderson, "Look at these medical reports. Water sources in 3 areas were tainted by Maxwell's activity. They are there to conceal evidence of previous crimes in addition to controlling the water." Clara Stevens organized safe homes and evacuation routes by working with business owners in 3 different counties. She told the gathered community leaders that Maxwell's company didn't simply target Liberty Falls. Their final opportunity to make everything public was when they contaminated water systems around the state. Mike Collins placed his veterans in strategic locations, their military background aligning with the corporate mercenaries' training. He said that professional teams are preparing for simultaneous strikes at each entrance point. When armed men tried to take evidence out of Detective Anderson's office, she confronted them. She calmly observed that the federal agent's use of force to steal evidence of corporate water contamination was an interesting approach, akin to an admission of guilt, as they emerged from concealed positions. As his last move came to fruition, Maxwell paced his command center and watched security feeds. "Collateral damage doesn't matter to me," he yelled into his phone. "End this tonight, secure those facilities, and delete the proof." However, Ethan had expected things to go worse. His operators maneuvered through the darkness, stopping mercenary groups before they could get to vital locations. Every corporate hit team had to contend with seasoned counterterrorism specialists. From his hiding place, the scout's voice crackled across emergency channels, "Sir. They are not merely going after infrastructure. They are facing demolition charges and want to demolish treatment facilities, poison the aquifer, and render it unusable if they are unable to. Oh, maintain control." Maxwell's final contingency had been discovered by Margot's investigation. Destroy the resource if the corporate takeover didn't work. Similar trends were observed in other places where resistance resulted in unexplained water supply contamination, according to her evidence. As mercenaries moved toward the main treatment facility, Mike's veterans reported that they were beginning their move. With military precision, several squads converged with tools intended for sabotaging infrastructure. While keeping a safe distance, Clara positioned citizens to record every corporate activity while leading community response squads. She told them to keep recording everything. Show the world the true face of corporate desperation. By intercepting mercenary communications, Ethan was able to expose the entire extent of Maxwell's scheme, which included the methodical destruction of water treatment facilities and the subsequent media narrative that blamed local carelessness. Then, corporate vultures would appear with solutions that were privatized. As federal ENV Vultures mental protection teams arrived with emergency orders, Detective Anderson informed Maxwell, "You're already finished. The tainted wells from your other enterprises were discovered. All of those enigmatic health problems in resistant cultures have now been documented." From the command center, Margot observed corporate mercenaries encountering unforeseen opposition at every turn. Ethan's operators were able to counter professional tactical teams, and their well-planned attacks were thwarted by ready defenders. As his veterans repulsed another attack attempt, Mike reported that the treatment plant was secure. "They are not approaching our water source in any way." As media outlets learned about Maxwell's other activities, his phone burst with messages. Similar trends were described by communities in 3 states: business pressure, gang intimidation, and, when resistance persisted, unexplained problems with the water supply. Mercenary equipment stockpiles, evidence of everything, sabotage gear, contaminating agents, and their staging area were discovered by the scout. All of these were linked to corporate shell businesses. Corporate troops were caught by Clara's security network fleeing from unsuccessful locations after losing their tactical edge to federal involvement and community preparation. The corporate partnership was now a powerful defense. This is no longer about a single community, Margot told the assembled state representatives. It involves corporate terrorism targeting American communities by stealing our most fundamental resources through corruption, mercenaries, and criminals. As the evidence grew, Ethan connected with federal reaction teams. Maxwell's company was facing national security ramifications in addition to criminal prosecution. Even corporate money couldn't hide the limits that were crossed by attacking public water supply. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Through his attorneys, Maxwell issued a warning. "Power comes from water. Manage it or eliminate it. Corporate interests only comprehend those possibilities." Evidence of systematic corporate attacks on public resources, ranging from mercenary strikes to gang violence, was abundant in Detective Anderson's evidence room. Every move was the result of boardroom choices that put business ahead of people's lives. They were never taught. As federal officers guarded business sites, Ethan informed his crew. Control and devastation are not the essence of true power. It has to do with justice, community, and safety. Liberty Falls demonstrated that resolute communities could withstand even the most extreme corporate violence by uniting against corporate terrorism. The community had to deal with corporate corruption, gang warfare, and now armed mercenaries who were getting stronger every time. As Maxwell's corporate empire started to fall apart from the inside out, Sunrise painted Liberty Falls in colors of gold. Sensing calamity, his own board of directors began to distance themselves. Secure calls were used to call emergency board meetings. As the evidence grew, executives rushed to defend themselves. "Sir," his pale assistant interrupted. "The board is demanding that you step down. Federal investigators are already receiving cooperation from corporate counsel." Ethan kept an eye on communications while the company's leadership disintegrated. He observed the arrival of high-end vehicles at federal buildings across 3 states using surveillance. Before the indictments were dropped, executives were rushing to strike agreements. In the main hall of the community center, Margot Harris arranged the data into a timeline that covered several decades. She told federal prosecutors that every company action had a similar pattern: resource control, gang intimidation, and, when communities objected, mystery pollution. Clara Stevens worked with local business owners who were impacted. Together, their testimonies exposed corporate attacks on water resources on a systematic basis. She informed Detective Anderson about 23 towns. They are all up against the same company, the same techniques, and the same threats. During the last security sweeps, Mike Collins guided his veterans to make sure that no corporate sabotage equipment was left close to water infrastructure. He said he had discovered another cache. Records that trace everything back to Maxwell's explicit directives. Across the questioning table, Detective Anderson turned to face Maxwell. Corporate conspiracies abound in her evidence files. She told him that your own security chief had turned. Every meeting in which you ordered attacks on public water supplies was captured on film. Maxwell's phone was always buzzing. Corporate partners cutting ties, political friends denying connections, and board members removing support. Self-preservation instincts took over, and his carefully crafted web of power fell apart. "There is a corporate legal staff at the federal building," Scout reported, carrying boxes of documents and observing through binoculars. "It appears that they were intended to erase internal records." Margot's investigation made the last connection. Vultures mental infractions, political bribery, and corporate shell corporations all led to Maxwell's office. Larger trends of resource theft and corruption were exposed by each piece of evidence. Secure treatment plant. As his veterans finished another patrol, Mike made an announcement. Corporate teams are no longer visible. Now they're fleeing in fear. Hundreds of impacted residents, business owners, farmers, and families, all victims of corporate water theft and contamination schemes, provided testimonies during community testimony sessions that Clara arranged. Maxwell's frantic appeals to political contacts were cut off by Ethan. Every conversation came to the same conclusion. Former allies distanced themselves from the growing federal inquiry and withdrew their support. "You're not understanding." Maxwell finally broke his haughtiness and told Detective Anderson. "The future lies in water. If you can control it, you can control everything. We were the first to see it." Margot presented written proof of corporate wrongdoing to state Vultures mental officials. She clarified that this was more than simply business. This was organized terrorism that targeted our most fundamental resources and American communities. Scout helped federal officials intercept escaping CEOs by providing vital information about corporate evacuation plans. With every arrest came fresh proof of organized resource theft and new layers of conspiracy. The last security teams are leaving. Mike used tactical communications to report. Water treatment facilities no longer have any corporate presence. The final business cars to leave town were caught on Clara's security cameras. Federal Vultures mental protection troops took the place of their military contractors. United Stand, a corporate community, had contributed to the exposure of corruption at the national level. Discovered their playbook. Spreading confiscated paperwork on her desk, Detective Anderson made an announcement. Full-scale corporate plan to take over water rights across the country through mercenary forces, political bribery, and gang violence. As the probe grew, Ethan worked with federal agencies. Attacking public water supplies put Maxwell's company in danger of national security repercussions in addition to criminal penalties. With you, the board is complete. Maxwell was told by his corporate lawyer. They are giving everything and collaborating completely. You're by yourself. As federal officials planned mass indictments, Margot collected the last pieces of evidence. Because of her teacher's commitment to research, communities in several states have been impacted by decades of corporate resource theft. They genuinely believed they could handle it. Clara informed the assembled entrepreneurs. Our rights, our future, and our water. They never grasped the true meaning of community. While government ENV Vultures mental teams evaluated water treatment facilities, Mike's veterans kept the area secure. Corporate efforts to undermine public resources had been thwarted by opposition from the united community. Ethan told federal task force leaders it was never about one place. Across the country, Maxwell's company was trying resource-stealing techniques. It so occurred that the community that retaliated was Liberty Falls. Increased threats, gang violence, corporate corruption, and armed mercenaries growing stronger through unity were all problems Liberty Falls had to deal with. The town's resistance revealed corporate attacks on American towns on a large scale, in addition to local crimes. Media crews crowded the steps of the federal courthouse as Maxwell was brought to justice, his costly suit unable to conceal his loss. Prosecutors provided evidence from 3 states and numerous localities regarding corporate attacks on public water resources. Corporate attorneys who had previously defended his activities now testified against him as they hurried to close transactions before the number of indictments increased. Ethan informed the heads of the federal task group that the last security sweep was finished. Infrastructure is safeguarded, water treatment facilities are secured, and monitoring systems are in place. Corporate surprises are over. As Margot Harris presented detailed evidence to the state ENV Vultures Mental Protection Committee, her teacher's voice remained steady. She clarified that the 23 villages that were targeted all experienced the same pattern: corporate pressure, gang intimidation, and, when resistance persisted, intentional pollution. Clara Stevens established a network to save local resources by coordinating with business owners in impacted towns. Maxwell told leaders that her company was not unique. The same strategies will be tried by others. We must remain watchful and unified. Mike Collins shared strategies that assisted Liberty Falls in fending off corporate takeover while training seasoned groups from nearby villages. He clarified that they rely on ambushing communities unprepared and by themselves. That's over now. As cases spread across state boundaries, Detective Anderson oversaw the flow of evidence. She informed federal prosecutors that corporate conspiracy was cross-jurisdictional. The same threats, organized crime, mercenary violence, resource theft, and development masquerading as development, were present in every town. Corporate defense plans were severely damaged by Scout's testimony. Clear conspiracy patterns were discovered by his in-depth reports of meetings between corporate executives and gang leaders. He clarified that they had planned everything and had used criminals to soften targets prior to business takeover. Axel Thompson was judged by himself, although his collaboration with Maxwell's group was taken into account. He informed the court that the gang was only their instrument. Corporate resource theft with expendable muscle. The entire idea was never disclosed to us. Margot's investigation served as the basis for federal conspiracy prosecutions. Her meticulous documentation revealed systemic attacks on public water supplies and linked corporate acts across several towns. Mike reported via security channels that the treatment facility was fully operating. There are new safety procedures in place. Community supervision was put in place. No more access to private corporations. Clara coordinated resistance tactics against corporate resource theft by setting up regional business alliance gatherings. She clarified that they target remote communities. We are more powerful than any company when we work together. As Maxwell's organization fell apart, Ethan kept an eye on the last corporate withdrawals. Members of the board turned against one another. Executives hurried to assist. Allies in politics vanished. The community's opposition caused the corporate powerhouse to collapse. During the last interview, Detective Anderson informed Maxwell that you were convicted by your own records. Every meeting is recorded, every order is monitored, and every crime is linked. Corporate haughtiness was proven. Margot observed federal ENV Vultures mental teams inspecting water treatment plants to make sure there was no more corporate sabotage. Thank you messages from other towns fighting comparable struggles were now on her kitchen table, which had previously been covered in evidence. Mike told the assembled veterans that the same security measures are being used in other towns, forming resource protection squads and community defense networks. Attempts at corporate takeover will no longer succeed. As company owners exchanged information on corporate strategies, Clara's hardware store continued to serve as the Resistance's headquarters. She informed guests from impacted neighborhoods that they attempted to split us. Rather, they brought us together. In order to assist federal agencies in locating hired operators, Scout gave crucial testimony regarding corporate mercenary teams. With every arrest, fresh proof of organized resource attacks on American communities was uncovered. As federal grand juries assembled in 3 states, Detective Anderson declared that final indictments were ready. ENV Vultures mental terrorism, organized crime, corporate conspiracy, everything is linked and recorded. Ethan established long-term monitoring methods in coordination with ENV Vultures mental protection teams. Every level of community oversight, he explained. Corporate secrets will no longer have access to public resources. The evidence is overwhelming. Maxwell's remaining attorneys were informed by federal prosecutors. Corporate collusion to use illegal activity to take public water rights. Exposing decades of systematic resource plunder. As federal protection orders became permanent, Margot convened with local authorities. She reminded the assembled journalists that they had threatened a teacher. Rather, they discovered the value of education, research, and communal cohesion. Liberty Falls prevailed, and its opposition served as a model for other localities dealing with corporate resource theft. With each attack turning into proof of systematic crimes against public resources, the community had to deal with growing threats, gang violence, corporate malfeasance, and armed mercenaries. Liberty Falls flourished with new life a year after Maxwell's company failed. With each rosebush serving as a tribute to tenacity, Margot Harris tended her garden on a crisply promising October morning. Successful adults who were formerly students frequently stopped by to exchange news or ask for guidance. Once under the shadow of gang monitoring, their kids were playing freely in the yards. Inside her house, new paint was applied to walls that had been designated for corporate demolition, pictures of community success were displayed on shelves, federal prosecutors were presenting evidence, and Maxwell was handcuffed. However, a straightforward frame containing the town's new water rights protection charter took center stage, guaranteeing centuries of community sovereignty. Ethan observed both minor and major changes as he strolled through the peaceful neighborhoods. Mike Collins' garage had grown and was now providing infrastructure protection training to veterans nationwide. Weekly security briefings were held at the community center, which helped neighboring towns identify corporate infiltration strategies. His phone was continuously buzzing with reports from localities using the Liberty Falls defense model. 3 towns organized opposition precisely as you instructed, a message was read, another corporate attempt was halted, and there were no casualties. Complete record of the evidence. Now they're fleeing in fear. The hardware store owned by Clara Stevens has completely changed. The one small store suddenly took up half a block, and as communities all throughout the country sought advice, its enlarged offices hosted meetings of business alliances. Once a place to hide from gang intimidation, the back room was transformed into a strategic planning center with maps on the walls that tracked attempts to steal corporate resources. Today, 6 additional communities become part of the partnership. Over coffee, she informed Margot that we had defeated the identical strategies. Although communities are now aware of the warning indicators, Maxwell's replacement is already attempting to carry on his work. The new Resource Protection Division was bustling with activity in Detective Anderson's office. Evidence boards prevented the isolation strategies that earlier left municipalities susceptible by monitoring business movements across state lines. From a single tenacious investigator, her team had expanded to 30 experts coordinating across the country. During the morning briefing, she claimed that corporate lawyers attempted to bribe council members in Prairie Junction. Following Liberty Falls tradition, the town kept a united front, documented everything, exposed attempted corruption, and prepared case files for federal prosecutors. As he supervised law enforcement training sessions, educating them to identify gang corporate linkages, Scout's atonement was complete. 3 additional towns were able to detect infiltration attempts before criminal pressure started thanks to his findings. The erstwhile hopeful had discovered meaning in shielding people from his previous existence. He cautioned the cops in attendance to keep an eye out for unexpected new firms, particularly those that require a lot of cash. They softened targets for corporate acquisition by first establishing a criminal presence. Since Liberty Falls, the pattern has remained the same. Expanded veteran security squads were overseen by Mike Collins. Their presence is no longer a cause for concern. Patrols checked infrastructure access points every day, kept an eye on the neighborhood, and communicated with other towns. Liberty Falls was now shielded by the military accuracy that had been used against it. Monitoring of treatment plants has been improved once more. During the inspection, he told Ethan. Protocols for community observers, motion sensors, and video surveillance. No one now tampers with our water without the town's consent. As Margot created training programs regarding corporate resource theft, her classroom expertise was extremely helpful. Pupils acquire the skills necessary to identify warning indicators, record questionable behavior, and uphold community awareness. Her teaching strategies proliferated across the country's educational networks. First, the property records. She gave visiting educators instruction. Money trails are followed by track shell businesses. Layers of documentation are used by corp. Orations to conceal ownership. Successful resource theft can be avoided by being aware of their strategies. Axel Thompson gave vital testimony regarding corporate criminal ties while serving a reduced term for cooperation. In 3 states, prosecutors were able to uncover similar plots because to his thorough accounts. Exposing the system that exploited him gave the former gang leader an unexpected purpose. Maxwell explained in depositions that his operation was not unusual. Gangs are used by corporations worldwide to conceal their involvement under criminal pressure. However, Liberty Falls revealed their entire strategy. Ethan set up a permanent training center outside of town where he taught police, veterans, and civilian organizations community defense techniques. His battle against corporate mercenaries served as the model for infrastructure protection initiatives across the country. He informed the assembled teams that they depended on isolation and surprise. Communities operating independently, ill-equipped to handle mounting demands. Liberty Falls demonstrated that corporate resource theft is defeated by united resistance. We now train people to identify dangers before they get violent. As business strategies changed, Lawrence Business Alliance grew internationally. Businesses experimented with innovative strategies. Shell companies are providing advances that appear to be authentic. Investment groups that promise a recovery in the economy. Water rights are being requested by IT companies for green energy projects. Every attempt against communities that were prepared failed. During the alliance meeting, she pointed out that they are becoming more cunning. However, trends continue to be the same. Now, any development that asks for control over water rights is given more attention. No more covert takeovers by corporations. Communities under corporate pressure adopted Detective Anderson's methods for gathering evidence as regular practice. Prosecutors throughout the country won convictions thanks to her methodical approach to documenting conspiracy. Corporate attorneys discovered that their standard defenses were ineffective against well-prepared evidence chains. She told the federal investigators that everything is connected. Follow money traces back to corporate boardrooms, government influence, business pressure, and gang activity. Liberty Falls shown that their deniability strategies are defeated by adequate documentation. Margot recalled the gloomy days of business threats and gang intimidation as she watched her roses grow next to restored fences. But now those recollections were powerless. Liberty Falls had changed vulnerability into readiness, loneliness into solidarity, and fear into strength. There were little alterations in the town itself. Families who had left due to gang pressure returned to create new companies. Young couples purchased homes with the assurance that essential resources would be protected in the neighborhood. When corporate security was present, children were free to play in parks. By teaching infrastructure defense to towns across the country, Mike's veterans extended their training programs. Once applied overseas, their military background now safeguarded domestic resources. Liberty Falls' strategy proved effective with each successful battle against corporate takeover efforts. At the weekly briefing, he informed that another community had been saved. Before gang violence began, corporate pressure was halted by concerted resistance. All the paperwork is prepared for the prosecutors. No casualties, no terror, no resource theft. Scout's expertise aided in spotting trends of corporate infiltration in communities that were at risk. His knowledge of gang corporate ties was crucial as businesses attempted to modify their strategies. Every unsuccessful attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' revelation of their practices brought about long-lasting reform. He informed the investigative teams that they were still attempting the same fundamental approach. Create criminal pressure, provide a business answer, and impose resource control. However, communities are now aware of the trend. Every time, united resistance is effective. As attempts to steal corporate resources changed, Ethan worked with government agencies. Businesses experimented with new strategies, such as environmental programs that required water rights, technological advancements that required resource control, and investment firms that promised infrastructure privatization as a means of reviving the economy. Every attempt against communities that were prepared failed. He informed task force leaders that they haven't undergone any significant changes. Communities are still being kept from accessing essential resources. Liberty Falls, however, shown that united towns maintain authority. Prepared resistance defeats corporate coercion. Clara's business partnership served as a template for communities dealing with comparable risks. Towns were able to continue united opposition against corporate pressure thanks to her coordinating techniques. Liberty Falls' journey from victim to conqueror brought about long-lasting change, as demonstrated by each successful defense. She informed visiting business owners that they anticipated easy targets. Instead, I discovered united communities. Theft of corporate resources is now totally unsuccessful. We learned how to safeguard our future from Liberty Falls. Law enforcement networks around the country adopted Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Prosecutors regularly won cases thanks to her methodical approach to exposing corporate complicity. Every successful prosecution demonstrated how Liberty Falls' opposition brought about long-lasting change. She counseled the assembled detectives to follow the evidence trails to the end. Link corporate boardrooms to gang activity. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. Every time, united communities prevail. Communities were able to identify corporate resource theft schemes early thanks to Margot's teaching initiatives. Her techniques proliferated through educational networks, assisting communities in preparing for resistance before dangers became more serious. Liberty Falls' transformation provided enduring protection, as seen by each successful defense. The town's water treatment plant was safe, guarded by several levels of security and community supervision. Town management maintained solid control over infrastructure that was formerly the focus of corporate control. Every unsuccessful takeover attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' opposition brought to long-lasting change. A year following Maxwell's loss, Liberty Falls had undergone a radical change. Once the victim of corporate resource theft, the town became a national model for community resistance. Its techniques proliferate, assisting others in safeguarding essential assets from organized corporate assaults. Reopened shops, renovated buildings, and a revitalized sense of community were all signs of the improvements. But above all, in the quiet assurance of those who had defeated corporate power and turned their triumph into safeguards for communities worldwide. As Ethan Harris spoke to the Congressional Panel on Public Resource Conservation, the marble halls of Washington, D.C., reverberated with testimony. As he described corporate strategies revealed by Liberty Falls opposition, his militaristic demeanor demanded attention. Behind him were small-town heroes Mike Collins, Clara Stevens, Detective Anderson, and Margot Harris, whose triumph spurred national change. Ethan informed the assembled lawmakers that corporate resource theft follows predictable trends. Crime-related intimidation creates pressure. Development agreements provide protection for business interests. Local opposition is thwarted by political influence. Liberty Falls demonstrated that communities can safeguard important resources, revealed this playbook, and developed practical responses. Beyond all predictions, Margot's educational program had grown. Once grading papers in her yard, the humble educator now led a nationwide training center that trained communities to spot corporate infiltration attempts. Her meticulous documentation techniques became the norm for resource preservation across the country. She told the assembled detectives to begin with property records. Shell corporations trace money trails from criminal activity to corporate boardrooms and conceal ownership through a variety of strategies. Liberty Falls demonstrated that their entire system is defeated by appropriate documentation. Clara Stevens' business partnership evolved into a national network that safeguarded local resources. The rear office of her hardware business served as headquarters, organizing opposition to corporate pressure in several states. Every successful defense demonstrated that Liberty Falls strategies brought about long-lasting change. As evidence revealed similar schemes across the country, Detective Anderson's resource protection section grew. Her methodical investigative techniques regularly assisted prosecutors in winning cases. Corporate attorneys discovered that their standard defenses were ineffective against well-established conspiracy tendencies. During the federal briefing, she clarified that everything is connected. Political influence, business pressure, gang activity, and the trace of evidence back to corporate decision-makers. Liberty Falls demonstrated that cohesive groups can overcome organized resource theft. From a small-town security team to a nationwide infrastructure protection network, Mike Collins' veteran program expanded. His military background aided localities in establishing strong defenses against attempts by corporations to acquire them. Every effective resistance demonstrated the consistency of Liberty Falls' model. He told the assembled teams to start by focusing on critical resources. Distribution networks, supply infrastructure, and water treatment plants. Keep these safe and record everything. Continue to supervise the community. Corporate pressure is always defeated by united resistance. Vulnerable communities were able to detect corporate infiltration early because to the Scouts' preventative initiatives. As businesses tried to modify their strategies, his knowledge of gang corporate ties proved invaluable. Every unsuccessful attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' revelation of their practices brought about long-lasting reform. As federal cases came to a close, Maxwell was subject to final judgment. When evidence revealed widespread attempts at resource theft across the country, his corporate empire fell apart. A life sentence for conspiracy against public resources was imposed on the guy who attempted to control the water supply in Liberty Falls. During sentencing, federal prosecutors stated that the evidence was overwhelming. Corporate conspiracy using armed mercenaries, political corruption, and criminal activity to target crucial resources. Systematic attacks against American communities were made public by Liberty Falls. As Ethan described corporate strategies against public resources, congressional hearings went on. New federal regulations safeguarding community water rights were shaped in part by his testimony. The resistance at Liberty Falls served as the impetus for national resource protection legislation. He told lawmakers that instead of finding lonely targets, they discovered cohesive communities. When faced with planned resistance, corporate resource theft completely fails. Liberty Falls demonstrated that methodical supervision is necessary to safeguard essential resources. Another group of community investigators graduated from Margot's National Training Center. Her techniques proliferated via educational networks, assisting communities in preparing for resistance before dangers became more serious. Liberty Falls' transformation provided enduring protection, as seen by each successful defense. She informed the instructors in attendance that knowledge deters resource theft. Recognizing business strategies, keeping track of evidence, and preserving community awareness. Liberty Falls demonstrated how effective education can be as a form of defense. As corporate pressure changed, the Lawrence Business Alliance organized across the country. Businesses experimented with new strategies, such as Vultures mental programs that required water rights, technological advancements that required resource control, and investment firms that promised infrastructure privatization as a means of reviving the economy. Every attempt against communities that were prepared failed. The functions of Detective Anderson's division were extended to other states. Her investigative techniques assisted in revealing corporate conspiracy tendencies that prey on marginalized communities. Every successful prosecution demonstrated how Liberty Falls' opposition brought about long-lasting change. Federal investigators should follow the evidence to the letter, she said. Link criminal activity to business choices. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. Consistently, united communities prevail. Nationwide protection networks were developed by Mike's veteran crews. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts thanks to their military expertise. Every successful resistance demonstrated the efficacy of Liberty Falls strategies. Scouts' observations aided in the discovery of corporate infiltration trends in several states. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies, his knowledge of gang corporate ties was essential. Every unsuccessful attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' revelation of their practices brought about long-lasting reform. He clarified at briefings that they are still employing the same fundamental approach: resource control, corporate solutions, and criminal pressure. However, now that communities are aware of patterns, coordinated resistance consistently succeeds. Committees in Congress used Liberty Falls' experience to design new restrictions. Federal laws set protection standards across the country, banned corporate control through criminal enterprise, and mandated community monitoring of essential resources. At hearings, lawmakers recounted how Liberty Falls affected everything. Revealed corporate resource-stealing tactics, developed a successful resistance paradigm, and set safety guidelines. The future is now in the hands of communities. Margot saw Maxwell's sentencing on national television. For his relentless attacks on public resources, the corporate giant who had threatened her roses was now being held accountable. Conspiracy tendencies affecting towns across the country were revealed by Liberty Falls' response. As businesses experimented with different strategies, Clara oversaw the Business Alliance reaction. Communities were able to fight corporate pressure together thanks to her network. Every effective defense demonstrated that Liberty Falls' transition from victim to victor brought about long-lasting improvement. Detective Anderson's techniques for gathering evidence were adopted as national norms. Prosecutors regularly overcame corporate defense tactics thanks to her methodical approach. Every successful case demonstrated how Liberty Falls' resistance produced enduring security. Training programs for Mike's veteran teams were extended throughout several states. Communities were able to create an effective defense against corporate resource theft thanks to their wartime expertise. Every successful opposition demonstrated the long-term effectiveness of Liberty Falls strategies. Ethan described the corporate strategies made public by Liberty Falls' triumph in his testimony at the final congressional session. Federal policies safeguarding communal resources across the country were shaped in part by his evidence. Systematic reform was built on the resistance of the minor towns. He told lawmakers that they never anticipated unified resistance. Corporate resource theft relies on political influence, covert pressure, and isolated targets. Liberty Falls demonstrated that when communities banded together, their entire system was overthrown. As communities encountered comparable dangers, Liberty Falls strategies proliferated across national networks. Law enforcement collaboration, veteran security teams, commercial partnerships, and educational initiatives. Every component worked well against attempts to steal business resources. Bipartisanly supported congressional reform bills created long-term safeguards for local resources. Federal laws preserved public access to essential infrastructure, mandated local supervision, and stopped corporations from gaining control through illegal activity. Liberty Falls revealed corporate resource theft tactics, developed an effective resistance model, set protection criteria, and altered national policy, according to federal officials. The future is now in the hands of communities. The victory of the small town revolutionized resource preservation across the country. Liberty Falls revealed systematic attacks on public resources, demonstrated that unified communities could beat corporate conspiracies, and brought about long-lasting change via tenacious opposition. As Maxwell's final sentencing drew near, media crews crowded the steps of the federal courthouse. The hammer of justice had finally struck the vultures' hands of corporate power. Margot Harris sat calmly in the front row inside, her presence a symbol of all the communities that had experienced similar dangers. Behind her, a group of veterans and business owners from 3 states were led by Clara Stevens and Mike Collins, demonstrating that unified communities could resist corporate bullying. As she stood at the prosecution table, Detective Anderson's evidence files revealed decades of institutionalized corruption. Every record, image, and testimonies demonstrated the extent to which Maxwell's company had penetrated places that were at risk. More significantly, they demonstrated how the resistance in Liberty Falls produced a model for retaliation. Ethan coordinated with security forces across the country from a tactical command center set up in a restored community building. Constant updates from other communities using Liberty Falls protective techniques were shown on his phone. Once employed against their society, the military's accuracy now protected others from corporate resource theft. The same strategies, gang pressure, economic threats, and political bribes, were employed in another attempt that was thwarted at River's Edge, according to a team leader. The community secured infrastructure, coordinated resistance, followed protocol precisely, and kept thorough records. All corporate forces retreated. Maxwell returned to the courtroom to face the judge wearing prison orange, his pricey clothes swapped out for regular Department of Correctional attire. The haughty corporate titan who had threatened a retired teacher was no more. A defeated man facing decades in prison stood in his place. A systematic scheme targeting essential public resources has been exposed by the evidence. The judge ruled that armed mercenaries, corporate corruption, and criminal enterprises were being used to take over community water sources. You are sentenced by the court to the maximum number of consecutive terms. Margot recalled the gloomier times when Vultures Riders plagued the streets of Liberty Falls as she watched Maxwell being dragged away in shackles. Now that she was not the focus of gang intimidation, her roses flourished freely. The town had changed vulnerability into prepared resistance, loneliness into solidarity, and fear into strength. Clara's hardware store had evolved into the headquarters of a national business alley. Ants dedicated to safeguarding local resources. A sophisticated communication center connecting towns across several states was now housed in her once modest office. Monitors recorded pressure attempts, monitored corporate moves, and coordinated the united reaction. Today, 5 additional villages joined. She presented her findings to a group of business executives who were all dealing with comparable corporate strategies that were aimed at water resources. However, they are now prepared. Liberty Falls taught us how to identify dangers early, keep up a united front, and safeguard critical infrastructure. The refurbished warehouse neighborhood now houses a veteran training facility overseen by Mike Collins. His military background aided localities in establishing strong defenses against attempts by corporations to acquire them. Every effective resistance demonstrated that Liberty Falls strategies produced long-lasting defense. First, they attack infrastructure. He gave instructions to assemble teams, water treatment plants, supply chains, and distribution systems to safeguard them, uphold community supervision, and keep records of everything. Corporate pressure is always defeated by united resistance. Former gang members were able to comprehend how companies controlled criminal operations thanks to the Scouts' rehabilitation program. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies, his observations proved to be extremely beneficial. Every unsuccessful attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' disclosure of their practices brought about long-lasting change. Keep an eye out for any changes in the pattern. During the prevention briefing, he gave advice. They're experimenting, but the fundamental plan is still the same. Resource control, corporate solutions, and criminal pressure. Collaborative communities quickly identify threats. Due to his close collaboration with federal investigators, Axel Thompson was the subject of an early release recommendation from the parole board. Through his testimony, corporate conspiracy tendencies that target vulnerable groups were made public. By preventing resource theft, the former gang leader discovered an unexpected purpose. Maxwell's company wasn't the only one. He clarified during the hearing that they all employ the same strategies: politics for protection, companies for control, and gangs for pressure. However, Liberty Falls made their entire system public. Now, communities are more aware. As communities encountered similar concerns, Margot's instructional campaign spread across the country. Towns were able to preserve important resources because to her meticulous documentation of business strategies. Every effective defense demonstrated the consistency of Liberty Falls' strategies. First, the property records. She gave visiting investigators instructions. Track financial links between illegal activity and business choices. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. Crucial resources are still in the authority of united communities. As companies experimented with different strategies, the Lawrence Alliance coordinated the reaction. Businesses tried innovative strategies, Vultures mental programs that required water rights, technological advancements that required resource management, and investment firms that promised infrastructure privatization as a means of reviving the economy. Every attempt against communities that were prepared failed. Communities under corporate pressure adopted Detective Anderson's methods for gathering evidence as regular practice. Across the country, prosecutors have routinely won cases thanks to her methodical strategy. Corporate attorneys discovered that their standard defenses were ineffective against well-established conspiracy tendencies. She told the federal investigators that everything is connected. Gang activity, pressure from businesses, political sway, and proof that leads back to corporate boardrooms. Liberty Falls shown that their deniability strategies are defeated by adequate documentation. Ethan set up a permanent training center to coordinate defensive networks throughout several states. His battle against corporate mercenaries served as the model for national infrastructure defense initiatives. Every effective resistance demonstrated the reliability of Liberty Falls strategies. The very landscape of Liberty Falls had changed. Buildings were refurbished and new companies opened. Owned by families that returned after escaping under pressure from gangs. Young couples purchased homes with the assurance that essential resources would be protected in the neighborhood. When corporate security was present, children were free to play in parks. By resolutely opposing corporate attacks on essential resources, the town's victory brought about long-lasting change. Their strategies proliferated across the country, assisting others in defending local rights against corporate piracy. The little village that defied corporate power became a global symbol of solidarity in resistance. With several layers of security and community supervision, the water treatment plant remained safe. Town management maintained solid control over infrastructure that was formerly the focus of corporate control. Every unsuccessful takeover attempt demonstrated that Liberty Falls resistance brought to long-lasting change. Margot's roses flowered next to reconstructed barriers, which were now triumphant celebrations rather than signs of resistance. After confronting corporate power, the educator now assisted communities around the country in safeguarding essential resources. Her garden grew abundantly. The transition from victim to conqueror is evidence of Liberty Falls. As company strategies changed, Clara communicated with business partners around the country. Communities were able to fight corporate pressure together thanks to her network. Each successful defense demonstrated that the transformation of Liberty Falls brought about long-lasting change. Law enforcement networks around the country adopted Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Prosecutors in several jurisdictions have consistently won cases thanks to her methodical approach. Every successful trial demonstrated how Liberty Falls resistance produced enduring security. Multiple statewide protection networks were built by Mike's seasoned troops. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts thanks to their military expertise. Every successful opposition demonstrated the long-term effectiveness of Liberty Falls strategies. As attempts to steal corporate resources changed, Ethan worked with government agencies. Businesses experimented with different strategies but always encountered ready communities. Every unsuccessful attempt demonstrated how Liberty Falls' revelation of their practices brought about long-lasting reform. Margot watched the neighboring kids play freely in her yard as Maxwell started serving successive life sentences. There were no more Vultures Riders. They were defeated by their corporate overlords. The collective resistance of the community eliminated their influence. Liberty Falls demonstrated that even large corporate plots aimed at essential resources might be thwarted by resolute towns. Restored structures, reopened companies, and a revitalized sense of community were all signs of the changes, but most significantly, so was the calm confidence of those who had defeated corporate power and turned their triumph into safeguards for communities worldwide. The legacy of Liberty Falls endured in each municipality that successfully fought against corporate resource theft. Every town that continued to defend itself together. Each triumph over organized assaults on public infrastructure. The small town's refusal to give up its water rights served as a model for safeguarding essential resources across the country. As Ethan Harris walked toward the witness table, the polished marble and wood were illuminated by the Senate chamber lights. Rows of local leaders from American communities sat behind him, each bearing tales of attempts to steal business resources. After saving Liberty Falls, the Delta Force commander was now ready to assist in defending all American communities. Theft of public water supplies by corporations follows predictable trends. Ethan gave the senators in attendance an explanation. Gang violence is one way that criminal businesses create pressure. Development agreements provide protection for business interests. Local opposition is thwarted by political influence. This playbook was revealed by Liberty Falls. Developed efficient defenses. Proven communities are capable of safeguarding important resources. Margot Harris's documented proof was included in large briefing materials that were distributed by congressional personnel. From one teacher's defense of local resources, her rigorous investigation had grown to include a thorough examination of corporate strategies across the country. The same trends targeting vulnerable communities were found on page after page. Every corporate failure follows the same pattern. Margot gave a statement. The power in her teacher's voice comes from experience. They locate remote communities. Use gang violence to create criminal pressure. Provide corporate solutions by developing ostensibly legal business ventures. Liberty Falls demonstrated how cohesive groups can overthrow their entire society. Clara Stevens spoke to the Business Protection House Subcommittee, describing how the proprietor of a small-town hardware store contributed to the formation of a national resistance network. From neighborhood merchants protecting local resources to concerted resistance to corporate thievery attempts, her business alliance had expanded. She told lawmakers they anticipated split opposition. Instead, they discovered unified communities. We learned how to spot corporate methods early thanks to Liberty Falls. Continue to oppose in concert. Collaborate with businesses to save important resources. Prepared communities are not hampered by their script. Detective Anderson provided the Senate Judiciary Committee with information showing how corporate conspiracies used criminal enterprises to target public resources. From local police work, her investigative techniques had developed into a methodical strategy for exposing corporate resource theft across the country. She provided recorded proof to demonstrate how everything is connected. Corporate sponsorship has been linked to gang activities. Boardroom choices are associated with business threats. Corporate influence is linked to political pressure. Liberty Falls demonstrated that accurate recording reveals the full plot. Federal infrastructure protection teams received security briefings from Mike Collins, who shared strategies that helped Liberty Falls fend off corporate takeover efforts. His military background turned local defense strategies into national security measures. They start by attacking vital infrastructure. He gave instructions to federal agents, water treatment plants, distribution systems, and supply networks to safeguard them, keep an eye on the neighborhood, and keep records of everything. Corporate pressure is consistently defeated by united resistance. As communities looked for early warning against corporate infiltration, the Scouts Prevention Program spread across the country. Towns were able to recognize threat patterns before violence erupted thanks to his knowledge of gang corporate relationships. He told protection teams to keep an eye out for systemic changes. Local resistance is hindered by government influence, gang pressure, and the unexpected emergence of new criminal organizations and legitimate-looking business opportunities. Collaborative communities are now able to identify patterns instantly. According to Axel Thompson's evidence before a Senate committee, corporations across the country are manipulating criminal enterprises. Companies exploited organized crime to soften targets for resource theft, as revealed by the observations of former gang leaders. Maxwell's method wasn't the only one. He gave senators an explanation. Everywhere, corporations employ the same strategies. Resistance is weakened by gang pressure. Resource theft is concealed by business transactions. Opposition is prevented by political influence. However, Liberty Falls demonstrated how local communities may overthrow an entire society. Margot's documenting techniques served as the basis for federal protection initiatives. Communities around the country were able to protect important resources from theft attempts thanks to her methodical approach to exposing corporate methods. First, the property records. She gave federal investigators instructions. Keep tabs on shell corporations that conceal corporate ownership. Track the money between illegal activity and choices made in the boardroom. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. As corporate strategies changed, Lorne cooperated with national business associations. Businesses experimented with innovative strategies. Water rights are necessary for environmental projects. Innovations in technology require resource management. Investment companies promise to privatize infrastructure in order to revive the economy. They're becoming imaginative, she noted during congressional testimony. However, trends continue to be the same. Now, every development seeking control over water rights is subject to increased scrutiny. Covert corporate takeovers are prevented by united business communities. The techniques used by Detective Anderson to gather evidence were adopted as standard practice for federal investigations. As corporate lawyers found standard defenses ineffective against proven conspiracy patterns, her methodical strategy helped prosecutors win cases regularly across the country. Completely follow the evidence trails. She gave federal investigators advice. Link business decisions to gang activity. Keep tabs on business risks to boardroom preparation. Record the political sway that encourages resource theft. Liberty Falls demonstrated that a thorough inquiry reveals the entire system. Ethan coordinated federal military networks and created a permanent training program. Communities around the country were able to defend critical infrastructure from corporate takeover efforts thanks to his experience fighting corporate mercenaries. They were dependent on seclusion. During the Senate briefing, he clarified. Communities operating independently, unprepared for mounting demands. Liberty Falls demonstrated that corporate resource theft is defeated by united resistance. We now train communities all throughout the country to identify dangers before they get violent. Using Liberty Falls as a model, congressional committees created additional federal restrictions. Laws that mandated community supervision of essential resources stopped corporations from controlling them through illegal businesses. Set national protection criteria. Everything was altered by Liberty Falls. During hearings, lawmakers provided explanations. Revealed tactics used by corporations to steal resources. Developed a successful resistance model. Established guidelines for protection. The future is now in the hands of communities. Margot observed reports of the bipartisanly supported law on national television. The educator who had been intimidated by gangs now contributed to the creation of federal legislation that safeguards communal resources across the country. Chambers of commerce across the country used the concepts developed by the Lawrence Business Alliance. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies for resource theft, her network assisted communities in maintaining a united front against corporate pressure. Federal agents were required to receive training on Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Her methodical strategy aided law enforcement organizations across the country in organizing opposition to attempts at corporate resource theft. Multiple statewide protection networks were built by Mike's seasoned troops. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from changing corporate takeover efforts thanks to their wartime experience. As attempts to steal corporate resources changed, Ethan worked with government agencies. Using Liberty Falls as an example, businesses experimented with different strategies but always discovered ready communities. He told a Senate committee that they never anticipated unified resistance. Corporate resource theft relies on political influence, covert pressure, and isolated targets. Liberty Falls demonstrated that when communities banded together, their entire system was overthrown. The victory of the small town revolutionized resource preservation across the country. Liberty Falls revealed systematic attacks on public resources, demonstrated that unified communities could beat corporate conspiracies, and brought about long-lasting change via tenacious opposition. As Margot watched news reports about the implementation of federal protection legislation, her roses grew freely. After being intimidated by a gang, the teacher now assisted communities around the country in protecting important resources against corporate theft efforts. As businesses tried last-ditch strategies, Clara coordinated the response of corporate alliances. Across the country, her network supported local communities in sustaining unified resistance to corporate pressure. The investigative techniques used by Detective Anderson became widely adopted by law enforcement organizations around the country. Prosecutors in several jurisdictions have consistently won cases thanks to her methodical approach. Multiple statewide protection networks were built by Mike's seasoned troops. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts thanks to their military expertise. As resource protection gained national attention, Ethan worked with government agencies. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the country, assisting localities in defending important resources from corporate looting attempts. By resolutely opposing corporate attacks on public resources, the small town's victory brought about long-lasting change. Their strategies assisted communities all around the country in thwarting corporate theft attempts against critical infrastructure. Strong bipartisan support helped congressional protection measures succeed, creating long-term protections for communal resources around the country. Federal laws preserved public access to essential infrastructure, mandated local supervision, and stopped corporations from gaining control through illegal activity. As representatives from 30 countries gathered to hear Liberty Falls' narrative, the United Nations conference room looked out over the Manhattan skyline. Standing at the stage, Margot Harris, the small-town educator, was now speaking to world leaders about the need of preserving local resources. Ethan, Clara, Detective Anderson, and Mike Collins sat behind her. International attention is being drawn to their success against corporate resource theft. Margot told the assembled officials that corporate strategies are the same everywhere. They target remote populations, use illegal businesses to create pressure, and use commercial development to provide solutions. Liberty Falls demonstrated how cohesive communities can fend against organized theft attempts of essential resources. As Liberty Falls held the Global Conference on Community Resource Protection, the streets were crowded with international press teams. Business leaders from 5 continents gathered in the hardware store where Clara Stevens had previously been intimidated by gang members to discuss ways to unite their resistance to corporate takeoff. Her attempts. Clara informed the assembled delegates, "We found the fundamental truth. Businesses anticipate polarized communities, solitary opposition, and covert pressure. United Towns defeated their entire system, as demonstrated by Liberty Falls. We are now assisting communities all around the world in safeguarding important resources." In order to counter corporate mercenaries, Ethan collaborated with multinational security teams and shared strategies. His military background aided communities all across the world in establishing strong defenses against attempts at resource theft. He told the assembled teams to start by focusing on key infrastructure. Protect water treatment plants, distribution networks, and supply lines, keep an eye on the neighborhood, and keep records of everything. Corporate pressure is consistently defeated by united resistance. Detective Anderson used investigative techniques that revealed corporate collusion while leading briefings for law enforcement agencies around the world. Communities in several nations were able to document proof of resource theft efforts thanks to her methodical approach. Completely follow the evidence trails. She provided guidance to international investigators, linked criminal activity to business choices, monitored business risks to boardroom strategy, and documented political influence that facilitated resource theft. A thorough analysis reveals the system as a whole. Mike Collins shared strategies that helped Liberty Falls fend against corporate takeover and created a training program for veteran organizations around the globe. His military background assisted localities in putting up a strong defense against attempts at resource theft. They depend on seclusion. He gave international teams an explanation. Communities operating independently, ill-equipped to handle mounting demands. Corporate resource theft is defeated by united resistance. We are currently assisting communities all around the world in identifying dangers before violence breaks out. International law enforcement agencies took notice of the Scouts' preventative effort. Communities all throughout the world were able to recognize threat patterns before violence erupted thanks to his comprehension of gang-corporate relationships. Keep an eye out for consistent changes. He gave advice to international protection teams on the unexpected emergence of new criminal organizations. Businesses make offers in response to political influence, gang pressure, and neighborhood opposition. When communities get together, they quickly identify patterns. Global educational networks used Margot's documenting techniques. International communities were able to protect important resources from theft attempts because to her methodical approach to exposing corporate methods. First, the property records. She gave visiting investigators instructions on how to link money between illegal activity and boardroom decisions, track shell corporations that conceal company ownership, and more. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. As corporate strategies changed around the world, Clara cooperated with international business organizations. Businesses experimented with different strategies but always encountered ready communities. Thanks to the example of Liberty Falls, they are trying fresh tactics. She mentioned this in her UN presentation. Patterns are consistent, despite Vultures mental programs demanding water rights, technological advancements requiring resource control, and investment groups proposing infrastructure privatization as a means of reviving the economy. Covert corporate takeovers are avoided by united communities. The techniques used by Detective Anderson to gather evidence became commonplace in foreign investigations. As corporate lawyers saw that standard defenses were ineffective against proven conspiracy patterns, her methodical methodology helped prosecutors win cases regularly around the world. Everything is related. She gave international law enforcement teams an explanation. Corporate sponsorship has been linked to gang activities. Boardroom choices are associated with business threats. Corporate influence is linked to political pressure. A thorough investigation reveals the full scheme. Ethan created a long-term initiative to coordinate global military networks. Communities all throughout the world were able to defend critical infrastructure from corporate takeover efforts thanks to his experience fighting corporate mercenaries. He informed the UN Security Council that they targeted remote communities. Divided resistance and disguised pressure were anticipated. United Town's victory over corporate resource theft was demonstrated by Liberty Falls. We are currently assisting communities all around the world in identifying dangers before violence breaks out. Multiple nation security personnel were trained by Mike's seasoned teams. Their military background aided localities in putting up a strong defense against attempts by corporations to steal resources all around the world. During the worldwide briefing, he announced another successful defense. The South American community adhered strictly to Liberty Falls norms. Before gang violence began, corporate pressure was halted by concerted resistance. All the paperwork is prepared for the prosecutors. Scouts' observations were useful in spotting trends of corporate infiltration in several nations. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies internationally, his comprehension of gang corporate ties was essential. He told overseas teams that they were still employing the same fundamental approach: resource control, corporate solutions, and criminal pressure. However, communities are now aware of patterns. Consistently, united resistance is effective. Margot observed the adoption of global guidelines for safeguarding local resources by UN representatives. After experiencing gang intimidation, the instructor now contributed to the creation of international regulations that stop corporations from stealing essential infrastructure. Chambers of commerce around the world adopted Clara's business alliance approach. As businesses attempted to change their strategies internationally, her network assisted communities in maintaining united resistance against corporate pressure. International law enforcement now requires training in Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Her methodical strategy aided organizations in coordinating global opposition to corporate resource theft activities. Over several continents, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from changing corporate takeover efforts thanks to their wartime experience. As resource protection gained international attention, Ethan worked with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world, assisting communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. A permanent commission on community resource protection was formed by the UN. International legislation preserved public access to essential infrastructure, mandated local oversight, and prevented corporate domination through criminal activity. Everything was altered by Liberty Falls. During the discussion, UN representatives described how they developed an effective resistance model, revealed corporate resource theft tactics, and set protection measures. The future is now in the hands of communities everywhere. As Margot observed international news coverage of the implementation of protection measures, her roses blossomed freely. After being intimidated by a gang, the teacher now assisted communities all over the world in protecting important resources against corporate theft efforts. As businesses tried their last-ditch strategies, Clara coordinated the global corporate reaction. Through her network, communities around the world were able to fight corporate pressure together. Detective Anderson's investigative techniques became widely used by law enforcement organizations around the world. Her methodical approach enabled prosecutors to consistently win cases in a variety of international jurisdictions. Over several nations, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Throughout the world, their military background assisted communities in protecting critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts. As resource protection gained international attention, Ethan worked with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world, assisting communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. By resolutely opposing corporate attacks on public resources, the small town's victory brought about long-lasting change. Their strategies assisted communities all around the world in thwarting corporate theft attempts against critical infrastructure. Strong global support helped adopt international protection standards, creating long-lasting protections for communal resources around the globe. Global regulations preserved public access to essential infrastructure, required local oversight, and prevented corporate dominance through criminal activity. From a little American village, Liberty Falls has become a global symbol of solidarity against corporate resource plunder. Their triumph demonstrated that cooperative communities might withstand organized efforts to take over critical infrastructure through corporate corruption and criminal activity. Margot Harris watched tour buses pull into Liberty Falls' new Community Resource Protection Academy in her yard 5 years after Maxwell's imprisonment. Once under threat from gang intimidation, her flowers now bordered walkways where tourists from around the world learned how to defend their own neighborhoods. Fear was turned into a global legacy of resistance by the retired educator who had to contend with corporate power. Ethan oversaw training sessions for protection teams from 3 continents inside the academy. The building, which was housed in the recently renovated Vultures Riders clubhouse, changed from being a symbol of intimidation to a symbol of community defense. As teams studied strategies that helped Liberty Falls combat corporate resource theft, classroom discussions were conducted in a variety of languages. He told the assembled groups to look for systematic patterns. They start by focusing on remote communities. Put pressure on them with illegal businesses. Provide answers by developing your business. Liberty Falls demonstrated how cohesive groups can overthrow their entire society. The hardware store owned by Lawrence Stevens had developed into a global headquarters that coordinated resistance to commercial alliances across the globe. Computer screens tracked corporate movements across several countries, covering walls where paint cans had stood. Her network assisted localities in sustaining unified resistance to attempts at resource theft. During the morning briefing, she reported another successful defense. Southeast Asian communities adhered strictly to protocol, were early to identify corporate techniques, resisted as a unit, and safeguarded critical infrastructure. The community still has authority over their water resources. From the new federal headquarters, Detective Anderson oversaw the operations of the International Resource Protection Division. Her investigative techniques, which targeted vulnerable groups, assisted law enforcement authorities around the world in exposing corporate conspiracy tendencies. She emphasized in a staff meeting that a recent example demonstrates consistent methods. Pressure is created by criminal organizations. Through development, business interests provide protection. Local opposition is thwarted by political control, but when communities band together, they overthrow the entire system. In order to help communities all across the world create a strong defense against corporate takeover attempts, Mike Collins oversaw a veteran training program. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies for resource theft, his military background proved beneficial. He told overseas teams that they continue to focus on infrastructure first. Protect water treatment plants, distribution networks, and supply lines, keep an eye on the neighborhood, and keep records of everything. Corporate pressure is always defeated by united resistance. Former gang members were able to comprehend corporate persuasion strategies thanks to scout rehabilitation programs. As businesses experimented with novel strategies to combat resource theft, his ideas became invaluable. Every preventative measure demonstrated that Liberty Falls techniques produced long-lasting security. During the preventative briefing, he suggested keeping an eye out for any changes in patterns. They are experimenting with new approaches, but the fundamentals are still the same. Resource control, corporate solutions, and criminal pressure. Threats are now instantly recognized by communities. Axel Thompson successfully transitioned from gang leader to champion for community protection. His evidence had contributed to the global exposure of corporate conspiracy tendencies. He now assists other tribes in identifying attempts at resource theft before violence erupted. During the training session, Maxwell clarified that his operation was not unique. Everywhere, corporations employ the same strategies. Resistance is weakened by gang pressure. Resource theft is concealed by business transactions. Opposition is prevented by political control, but their entire system is overthrown by united communities. Margot's teaching strategies were adopted as the norm for community safety initiatives across the globe. Her methodical approach to recording corporate strategies assisted communities in thwarting attempts at theft of essential resources. She told visiting researchers to begin with property records. Keep tabs on shell corporations that conceal corporate ownership. Track the money between illegal activity and choices made in the boardroom. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. As corporate strategies changed around the world, Clara cooperated with international business organizations. Businesses experimented with different strategies but, thanks to Liberty Falls' example, discovered communities that were ready for opposition. She mentioned during the alliance meeting that they are becoming more sophisticated. Water rights are needed for environmental projects, resource management is needed for technological advancements, and investment organizations promise infrastructure privatization to boost the economy. However, trends continue to be the same. Hidden takeovers are avoided by united communities. Detective Anderson's techniques for gathering evidence were adopted by law enforcement organizations all across the world. As corporate lawyers saw that standard defenses were ineffective against proven conspiracy patterns, her methodical methodology assisted prosecutors in regularly winning cases across several jurisdictions. During training, she highlighted that evidence trails tell the whole tale. Corporate sponsorship might be linked to gang activity. Boardroom decisions are linked to business threats. Corporate influence is linked to political pressure. A thorough investigation reveals the full scheme. Ethan set up a permanent academy to coordinate defense networks around the world. Communities all throughout the world were able to defend critical infrastructure against changing takeover attempts thanks to his experience fighting corporate mercenaries. He informed the assembled teams that they anticipated isolated targets. Communities operating independently, ill-equipped to handle mounting demands. Liberty Falls demonstrated that corporate resource plunder is defeated by united resistance. We now train people to identify dangers before they get violent. Protection troops from several nations were trained by Mike's seasoned teams. Their military background aided localities in putting up a strong defense against attempts by corporations to steal resources all around the world. During the security briefing, he announced another successful prevention. Early detection of corporate techniques, united resistance, infrastructure protection, and thorough documentation were all done by the Western European community. The corporate attempt was a complete failure. Scout's observations revealed patterns of corporate infiltration on other continents. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies internationally, his comprehension of gang corporate ties was essential. He told the international teams that they were still using the same approach. Create criminal pressure, provide a business answer, and impose resource control. However, communities are now aware of patterns. Consistently, united resistance is effective. Margot saw the regular arrival of new groups at the Community Resource Protection Academy. After being intimidated by a gang, the teacher now assisted communities all over the world in protecting important resources against corporate theft efforts. Clara's business partnership strategy became the industry standard for safeguarding local resources. As businesses attempted to change their strategies globally, her network assisted in preserving United's resistance to corporate pressure. International law enforcement now requires training in Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Her methodical strategy aided organizations in coordinating worldwide opposition to corporate resource theft activities. Over several continents, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from changing corporate takeover efforts thanks to their wartime experience. As resource protection gained international attention, Ethan worked with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world, assisting communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. By resolutely opposing corporate attacks on public resources, the small town's victory brought about long-lasting change. Their strategies assisted communities all around the world in thwarting corporate theft attempts against critical infrastructure. Liberty Falls changed from a community in danger to a global representation of solidarity against corporate resource plunder. Their triumph demonstrated that cooperative communities might withstand organized efforts to take over critical infrastructure through corporate corruption and criminal activity. As new groups arrived at Protection Academy, Margot's roses bloomed abundantly. Once the target of gang intimidation, the garden has come to represent effective opposition to corporate resource theft activities around the globe. As businesses experimented with new strategies, Clara coordinated the worldwide corporate response. Through her network, communities around the world were able to fight corporate pressure together. Detective Anderson's investigative techniques became widely used by law enforcement organizations across the globe. Her methodical approach enabled prosecutors to consistently win cases in a variety of international jurisdictions. Over several nations, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Throughout the world, their military background assisted communities in protecting critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts. As resource protection became a global norm, Ethan collaborated with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world to assist communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. Every community that successfully fought corporate resource theft, maintained a united defense, and shielded critical infrastructure from organized attacks embodied the town's legacy. Liberty Falls demonstrated that even large-scale corporate plots against public resources might be foiled by resolute communities. Liberty Falls experienced another spring bloom 10 years after Maxwell's conviction. In her garden, which is now a designated historical site, Margot Harris stood with her roses in full bloom. In streets that had previously been plagued by gang surveillance, children played in safety. Their laughter reverberated throughout a town that had been changed by courage rather than fear. The retired educator observed tour buses transporting tourists from 6 countries who wanted to learn Liberty Falls principles arrive at the Resource Protection Academy. Inside her house, walls that had previously been designated for corporate demolition showcased international honors honoring her contribution to communal resource protection across the globe. Simpler things, however, revealed her greatest pride. Young families relocating, former students coming home, and a town becoming stronger via solidarity rather than fear. Ethan traveled well-known patrol routes, now demonstrating to foreign security teams how Liberty Falls changed from a vulnerable target to a world-renowned community defense model. Teaching others to defend important resources against corporate theft efforts was a deeper purpose for the former Delta Force commander. He reminded the assembled teams to remember the core truth. They discovered unified communities, split resistance, and isolated targets as they had anticipated. Rather, Liberty Falls demonstrated that when people band together, resolute municipalities can fight corporate resource theft. The hardware store owned by Clara Stevens has evolved into a living museum of effective resistance. Business executives from all over the world researched how neighborhood retailers changed from being easy targets to forming a cohesive coalition to safeguard local resources. Her strategies assisted communities in sustaining a unified front against corporate pressure on a worldwide scale. During the morning briefing, she announced another victory. Early detection of corporate methods, coordinated resistance, infrastructure protection, and thorough documentation were all done by a small South American village. The neighborhood still controls their water. From Liberty Falls headquarters, Detective Anderson oversaw the operations of the Global Task Team. Law enforcement authorities around the world were able to uncover corporate conspiracy patterns that targeted vulnerable groups thanks to her investigative techniques. Liberty Falls' opposition brought about long-lasting change, as seen by each successful case. She clarified during a staff meeting that recent evidence supports the same strategies. Pressure is created by criminal organizations. Through development, business interests provide protection. Local opposition is thwarted by political control, but when communities band together, they overthrow the entire system. Mike Collins oversaw training sessions for veterans at the Academy's enlarged facilities. His military background aided communities all around the world in establishing strong defenses against attempts by corporations to acquire them. Every effective resistance demonstrated the reliability of Liberty Falls strategies. Infrastructure continues to be their primary objective. He was a coach to international teams. Protect water treatment plants, distribution networks, and supply lines, keep an eye on the neighborhood, and keep records of everything. Corporate pressure is always defeated by united resistance. Worldwide, Scout prevention initiatives have helped communities identify corporate infiltration attempts early on. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies internationally, his knowledge of gang corporate ties was useful. Every preventative measure demonstrated that Liberty Falls techniques produced long-lasting security. At the briefing, he suggested keeping an eye out for any changes in patterns. They are experimenting with different tactics, but the fundamental strategy is still the same. Resource control, corporate solutions, and criminal pressure. Threats are now instantly recognized by communities. After completing his rehabilitation, Axel Thompson oversaw outreach initiatives that assisted other communities in fending off corporate pressure. Global conspiracy tendencies had been exposed thanks to his testimony. He now assisted communities in identifying attempts at resource theft before the violence intensified. Maxwell clarified during training that his operation was not unusual. Everywhere, corporations employ the same strategies. Resistance is weakened by gang pressure. Resource theft is concealed by business transactions. Opposition is prevented by political influence. However, their entire system is defeated by united communities. Margot's teaching strategies have established themselves as the industry standard for community safety initiatives. Her methodical approach to recording corporate strategies assisted communities all around the world in protecting important resources from attempts at theft. Liberty Falls resistance brought about long-lasting change, as demonstrated by each successful defense. She told visiting researchers to begin with property records. Keep tabs on shell corporations that conceal corporate ownership. Track the money between illegal activity and choices made in the boardroom. Their entire system is defeated by proper documentation. As corporate strategies changed around the world, Clara cooperated with international business organizations. Businesses experimented with different strategies, but Liberty Falls' example helped them discover ready communities everywhere they looked. She mentioned during the Alliance meeting that they are still trying to take control. Water rights are necessary for Vultures' mental projects. Innovations in technology require resource management. Investment companies promise to privatize infrastructure in order to revive the economy. However, trends continue to be the same. Hidden corporate control is prevented by united communities. The way that law enforcement around the world approaches corporate resource theft has changed as a result of Detective Anderson's strategies for gathering evidence. Prosecutors in numerous jurisdictions around the world have regularly won cases thanks to her methodical documentation. She clarified during training that the whole story is told by the evidence. Corporate sponsorship has been linked to gang activities. Boardroom choices are associated with business threats. Corporate influence is linked to political influence. A thorough investigation reveals the full scheme. Ethan created long-term academy initiatives that coordinated international defense networks. Communities all throughout the world were able to defend critical infrastructure against changing takeover attempts thanks to his experience fighting corporate mercenaries. He informed the assembled teams that they anticipated easy targets. Communities operating independently, ill-equipped to handle mounting demands. Liberty Falls demonstrated that corporate resource theft is defeated by united resistance. We now train people to identify dangers before they get violent. Protection troops from several nations were trained by Mike's seasoned teams. Their military background aided localities in putting up a strong defense against attempts by corporations to steal resources all around the world. During the security briefing, he announced another successful prevention. The Eastern European community maintained united resistance, safeguarded infrastructure, documented everything, and recognized capitalist techniques early. The corporate attempt was a complete failure. Scout's observations revealed patterns of corporate infiltration on other continents. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies internationally, his comprehension of gang corporate ties was essential. He told the international teams that they were still using the same approach. Create criminal pressure, provide a business answer, and impose resource control. However, communities are now aware of patterns. United resistance operates reliably. Where gang surveillance used to roam, Margot observed kids playing unhindered. The educator who had to deal with corporate power was now assisting communities all around the world in preventing attempts to steal important resources. As a sign of successful resistance, her roses flowered. Clara's business alliance approach is now the industry standard for safeguarding local resources. As businesses attempted to modify their strategies globally, her network assisted in preserving united resistance despite corporate pressure. International law enforcement now requires training in Detective Anderson's investigative techniques. Her methodical strategy aided organizations in coordinating worldwide opposition to corporate resource theft activities. Over several continents, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Communities were able to protect critical infrastructure from changing corporate takeover efforts thanks to their wartime experience. As resource protection gained international attention, Ethan worked with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world, assisting communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. 10 years after Maxwell's loss, Liberty Falls had undergone a radical change. Once the subject of corporate resource theft, the town has come to represent united resistance on a global scale. Their triumph demonstrated that cooperative groups might defeat organized efforts to take over critical infrastructure. New groups came seeking direction, and Margot's garden grew freely. Once the target of gang intimidation, roses have come to represent effective opposition to corporate resource theft activities around the globe. As businesses experimented with new strategies, Clara coordinated the worldwide corporate response. Her network supported local communities in preserving united resistance in the face of global corporate pressure. Detective Anderson's investigative techniques became widely used by law enforcement organizations across the globe. Her methodical approach enabled prosecutors to consistently win cases in a variety of international jurisdictions. Over several nations, Mike's seasoned staff set up protection networks. Throughout the world, their military background assisted communities in protecting critical infrastructure from corporate takeover attempts. As resource protection became a global norm, Ethan collaborated with international organizations. Liberty Falls techniques are used all around the world to assist communities in defending important resources from corporate plunder attempts. Every municipality that successfully fought corporate resource theft, upheld united defense, and shielded critical infrastructure from organized attacks embodied the town's legacy. Liberty Falls demonstrated that even large-scale corporate plots against public resources might be foiled by resolute communities. 10 years later, Liberty Falls was stronger than before, changed by solidarity as opposed to fear. When people band together to fight systematic attempts at resource theft, the village that fought corporate power in one place became a real example of how cohesive communities can safeguard important resources. 2 more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss these if you like this one. Simply click to view, and remember to subscribe. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.